Chapter 771. Do you still remember the transfer of magic circuits? There were two conditions for the transfer. First, both parties had to be of the same origin. Second, it had to be a live transplant. Third, the transferer had to do it voluntarily. No one would have thought that there would be such a miraculous situation where both Duke and Antonidas fulfilled all three criteria. Duke had originally used Antonidas' arcane throne and ice crown. Although the magic circuits in his body had been expanded and modified when he obtained the Fire of the Breaking Dawn gift pack in the Dragon's Slumber Temple, the foundation did not change. As for living beings, at the very least, before Old Man Anthony's soul returned to his own body in the form of a demon spirit, his body was still alive. However, he was just a vegetable that had almost forgotten to breathe and was about to stop showing signs of life. At that time, the old man's soul had not returned, and the magic circuits extended from his soul naturally did not resist the previous owner. So, at that moment, Antonidas had, voluntarily. Because of the successful magic circuit transplant with Elugia, Duque had become very familiar with this task with the help of the system elf. In the short time that Duque had held Antonidas' corpse, Duque had directly plundered more than 60% of the old Breaking Dawn mage's magic circuits. Unfortunately, there was not enough time. Duque had only plundered the outer and middle magic circuits, and did not have the time to dismantle the true core. If he had an hour, as an honest and reliable young man, he would definitely be able to turn Antonidas into a magic apprentice by the time he returned. This was why Antonidas's battle power had plummeted after returning to his body and becoming a great lich. Even after having 60% of his magic circuits plundered, he could still barely maintain his Breaking Dawn rank. It could only be said that the original Antonidas was very, very strong. Of course, the strength and weakness of mages had always coexisted. An archmage who was completely focused on defense could certainly destroy the world, but if he made a mistake, even someone as strong as the demigod Medivh would be killed with a single slash. After taking 60% of the circuits, Duque could be considered to have stepped into the Breaking Dawn rank in terms of quantity. However, Duque was still not a true Breaking Dawn. After all, the time was too short, and Duke did not have the time to completely modify Antonidas' magic circuits. Every mage had a different habit of using magic. In order to better practice their metamagic specialties, they would subdivide and specialize their outermost magic circuits. Also back then, Duque had always aimed for the path of the strongest. If his goal was only to become a Breaking Dawn, then Antonidas's inheritance would be enough for him to advance. Duque was pursuing the path of the strongest. With arcane spell as the foundation, coupled with fire and ice, the path of a three-elemental archmage was undeniably powerful. Unfortunately, with Alexstrasza and Maligo's enthusiastic help, this pit had become incomparably large. Under normal circumstances, it was very likely that Duque would not be able to practice so many magic circuits even after he was 100 years old. Not to mention flame, which was nowhere to be seen on the other side. Even with Antonidas' 60% of his circuits, he was only able to make a little noise on the frost side. As for the current situation, there were only 4 words to describe it. Far from enough. What else could Duque do? He could only smile bitterly. In the eyes of others, Duque was already a Breaking Dawn archmage, or perhaps he was already close to the legendary position of archmage. He knew his own affairs best. Of course, Duque could not publicly expose this wonderful misunderstanding. The alliance was suffering a great disaster, and it would not be surprising for there to be an avalanche effect if there was no uplifting news. Duque could only continue pretending. Moreover, as long as Duque was given enough time, Duque believed that with the magic power in his own magic circuits, he would not be inferior to a Breaking Dawn in terms of combat power. Alright, in the eyes of bystanders, the newly advanced Breaking Dawn Grand Wizard Duke Marcus, escorted by a group of alliance officers, proudly stepped onto the pier made of ice that resembled a work of art. Walking on the ice that would not slip, Kale, that's revealed an envious look as he looked at the perfect ice pier that had been formed in one go. If Father also practiced ice magic, he would not be able to reach Duque's level of control. Kale that sighed as he recalled the magic demonstration his father had given him back then. It was a lively fire elemental phoenix the size of a peacock, condensed from fire elements. He still remembered his heartfelt admiration for the fiery feathers on the phoenix's body. However, compared to Duque's move, although he did not want to admit defeat, he vaguely felt that Duque was still slightly better. The difficulty of one's own control of magic elements increased exponentially with the increase in distance. This was why the range of the fireball spell for most mages was only 36 yards. It was not that they did not want to throw it further, but if they threw it too far, the fire elements would dissipate and lose their lethality. For example, King Anastrian might be able to build a large pier like Xueqi had done in one go. However, Kale That's did not believe that his father could line up 36 piers on such a huge beach that could withstand the impact of a warship docking. Even if it was a different method, such as a more elaborate 36 walls of fire that could only provide fire for barbecue, this was not something his father could do. He could only sigh in admiration towards Xueqi. At this moment, a large ship flying the flag of Jaina slowly entered the harbor. The huge bow of the ship broke through the waves. A graceful female figure dressed in a blue robe with golden edges stood at the bow of the ship like a goddess crossing the sea from the east. She looked at the miracle that had happened in an instant. Xueqi looked at Jaina and was filled with emotion. The heroine of the Alliance who had been present throughout the history of the Azeroth War since the Battle of the Dark Portal, Jaina Proudmoore, had finally grown up. Mature, beautiful, moving. If not for the lost 10 years, Xueqi was confident that he could firmly control Jaina in his hands. Now, he could only go with the flow. Jaina was also staring at Xueqi on the pier. Duke Marcus, a living legend. Whether it was his deeds or his strength, they were all unforgettable to mortals. Such a peerless powerhouse was actually her nominal fiancé, but there were no feelings to speak of between them. Jaina did not know what expression she should use to face Xueqi. His soft blue and white robe was enveloped in a strange chilly aura. Under the summer sun, the ice elements that floated around him emitted a dazzling light like diamond stardust. At this moment, in the Alliance, the true powerhouse, Duke Marcus, appeared. Chapter 772. The sailors and soldiers on the ship began to move forward and lean against the side of the ship. Whether it was the high-spirited new recruits or the Jaina mages who were prepared to face the Calamity army, all of them were shocked by the appearance of an absolute powerhouse. Jaina's eyes focused on the familiar figure. Is he still the Xueqi that I know? Jaina's heart was beating so hard that it seemed like it would jump out of her chest at any time. Unknowingly, her breathing had become rapid. Standing at the bow of the ship, no one spoke. Everyone's eyes were attracted by Xueqi, who stood on the ice pier like a lighthouse. They could not move their eyes away at all. It had nothing to do with awe. It was all because of the unique aura that Xueqi exuded that made them unable to look away. The Alliance had never held a Seven Kingdoms Champion Knight challenge. However, there was no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts. The title of the strongest had always been something that people enjoyed talking about. After the Elven Kingdom of Quel Salis withdrew from the Alliance, the title of the strongest naturally fell to Antonidas. Unfortunately, Old Man Antonidas was too old. His age and appearance meant that he was destined to not be an idol. People looked forward to heroes and praised young heroes, but they still looked forward to young heroes the most. 10 years did not leave any traces on Xueqi's face. With the blessing of the life-giver Alexstrasza, Xueqi's body and face forever remained at the most energetic age of 18. With the incomparable vitality of a young man, and the enchanting steadiness of a mature man, in addition to the shining halo of the strongest human, Xueqi had unintentionally become the kind of handsome man that everyone would like to see. There were many handsome men who were more beautiful than Xueqi. Unfortunately, in the face of disaster, most of those handsome but useless men were killed. After becoming immortals, their faces became moldy and they became unlucky men. Jaina suddenly realized. Xueqi. There was only Xueqi. There was only Xueqi who could point out a way for thousands of people with just a few words. There was only Xueqi who could save 6-digit refugees with a flick of his finger. There was only Xueqi who could see the future of Azeroth with a glimpse of the void. This was the person she wanted the most in her heart. Jaina suddenly tapped her forehead with 3 fingers on her left hand. Becoming a radiant moon mage will allow you to establish your own sect? Ha ha. Ha ha ha. Magna, I really am the biggest idiot in the world. Magna Aegwin, who was dressed like a high elf consultant, tilted her head. I spent the most precious 10 years of a woman's life in an attempt to get rid of the shadow that Xueqi had cast on me. Who would have thought that the thing I wanted the most would be on Duke's body? Don't you think I'm stupid? Wow! Mag whistled nonchalantly. If you can't fight against the strong, then rely on the strong. That's a smart move. You agree? Jaina seemed a little surprised. In her impression, Mag and Duque didn't get along very well. After all, Duque had taken away Mediva's Karazhan, and in the end, he was homeless after being revived. Mag rolled her eyes. When did I object? Previously, I advised you to leave Duque purely because I didn't know what Duque's attitude would be, and that it would be very disadvantageous for you to continue staying with an uneasy attitude. But now, does this count as love at first sight? Love at first sight? No. I would never do such a stupid thing. I have never rejected Duque since I was 13. It was purely because I could always feel a faint hostility from Duque that I didn't dare to put my future in the hands of Duque. But now, all the problems aren't problems anymore? Heh. Mag gave a thought-provoking smile. What Aurelia, Sasha, Elucia, Kalia, and so on are all not problems. Jaina turned her head and revealed a provocative look. She smiled, a smile that was like 1,000 flowers blooming. I am not an innocent little girl. I wasn't before, and I won't be in the future. But I have my way, and I know Duque's weakness. He definitely can't bear to reject a sincere love. Mag smiled slyly. Sincere? Can you do that? As long as our goal is the same, my sincerity will be eternal. Moreover, there is only one good man. We are all women, and if we don't fight for it, will we be able to get a good man's love just by crying at home? Jaina was in high spirits. Seeing that the ship was about to reach the shore, she turned around and walked down the bow. She waved her hand lightly, and the loose magician robe on her instantly changed. It was no longer that bag-like magician robe that covered her good figure tightly, but a set of tight clothes similar to that of a combat magician. On the left and right side of her were 2 layers of winged pauldrons, and on the chest was a bright silver breastplate that could barely cover the pair of arcane peaks that made the 2 princes go crazy in history. The breastplate was very short, revealing an extremely sexy belly button. What was more unexpected was that Jaina actually had a mermaid line that was similar to that of a female ranger. Under the purple skirt was a pair of white jade-like tights that outlined the perfect lines of her legs. Jaina looked like she was ready for battle. In fact, it was this kind of heroic posture that could capture Duque's heart the most. As expected, when he saw Jaina slowly descending from the ship using the levitation spell, like a goddess, Duque's eyes were a little dazed. She gently glanced at the people of Rotterdam behind Duque, and her gaze only stopped on Kale. That's for less than 1/10 of a second. Jaina smiled like a flower, bowed, and said to Duque, Radiant Moon Mage Jaina Proudmoore awaits your orders. His Excellency Duke Marcus, the commander of the Alliance. Impeccable appearance, perfect etiquette, and what was rarer was that everything was done according to the rules. That made it so that no one could find fault with it. Indeed, Jaina was still Duque's fiancée in name. Duque had also thought about how he should deal with Jaina if she came crying, throwing a tantrum, and asking for the treatment of a fiancée. Perhaps Duque would temporarily give in, but he would definitely hate Jaina in his heart. Now that she had directly abandoned her identity as a princess and fiancée, and had cleanly applied to go to the battlefield, Duque had a better impression of Jaina from the bottom of his heart. Duque pretended to ignore the heroic Jaina. His gaze was a little blank, as if there was nothing in front of him, and not a powerful and beautiful female mage. The world is facing the most terrifying crisis in history. The Alliance needs the strength of every powerhouse. Thank you very much for your support, Miss Jaina. Chapter 773. Duque could not predict how Azeroth's history would play out. Arthas had left Quel Salis alone and gone to Rapid Stream Castle to cause trouble. Antonida's fall had cast a dark cloud over Duque's heart. In the original history, Second Fool had fallen. Although he had killed many important people, there was only one person he had truly turned into an immortal, Servanas, who had completely angered him. Now everything was different. Wuther had an unwavering soul, and Second Fool could not do anything to his teacher. Terenas had been too weak when he was alive. He probably could not even turn into a lich. The latest news was that Arthas had turned every Morning Star Mage in the Dalajan who had died in battle or surrendered into a lich. At the moment, the Calamity Army had at least one Breaking Dawn and several Radiant Moons. There were also a dozen Dreadlords on the Scourge's side, and Arthas, who had officially stepped into the demigod realm. It was no exaggeration to say that the snowball effect of the Scourge was starting to form. The High Elves' isolationism was acting up again. This time, Anastrian and the Silver Moon Council refused to join the Alliance no matter what. Even though Duque had repeatedly warned them that the Scourge's target should be the elves, they just refused to listen. At most, they would blindly strengthen the defensive magic formation that they thought was invincible. Duque was so angry that he wanted to vomit blood. In the magic message, Duque did not care about anything else. According to the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza's estimation, the Scourge's real target is likely the Sun Well. If these bones are allowed to obtain the power of the Sun Well, they may very well use it to summon one of the leaders of the Burning Legion, Archimonde. Kale that's tried to persuade an Astrian, but an Astrian just did not listen. Sir Commander Marcus, times have changed. After 13 years of preparation, the High Elves have the ability to protect themselves and the Sun Well. Also, the light of the Sun Well cannot be tainted by outsiders. After saying the last sentence, which was obviously a warning, the Sun King cut off the magic message. Damn. Sun King, you're awesome. You even think that I'm an evil person who is trying to use the Scourge to steal the power of the Sun Well. Duque was so angry that his lungs were about to explode. However, when he predicted that the Doomsday Army would attack Xueqi, he had no choice but to let Kale, that's go. In history, the Kaisi only received the news that his hometown had been attacked very late. When he rushed back, it was already too late. He could only bring his defeated army and join the alliance in frustration and anger again in an attempt to take revenge. It was no wonder that when Kaisi led a team to join the alliance for a short period of time, he was treated with disdain everywhere. Oh no, not elves. Speaking of which, the High Elves had already been forced to join the alliance twice. Who in the alliance would be nice to such a fickle country that treated the alliance like a market, coming and going as they pleased? The problem was that Xueqi hadn't joined the alliance yet. Alright, their prince had to rush back to save them. There was no reason for Duque to force Kaisi to work by his side. Duque also had a headache now that his only mage-type helper was gone. Now, Jaina had come to play the role of a strong helper. If he didn't consider the bad debt between him and Jaina, it would be a good thing. After all, from a military point of view, Jaina's leadership and personal strength were more than enough. If there was anything else that Duque had to worry about, it was that Jaina would be courting death because of her identity. Facing Jaina, Duque sighed softly and said solemnly, I'm very happy that you can stand up at this time and fight for humans and for the Alliance. I do need a strong mage to help me. But before I officially welcome you to join the Alliance, I have to say in advance. Jaina nodded obediently. Go ahead. Duque said in a voice that Mograine and the others could hear clearly. Now we are facing a major crisis that is enough to destroy the world. I hope that the Alliance can return to the state of the last war, where there is only one clear and unified command. Everyone, regardless of their status, is a general of the Alliance. So, once you wear the badge of the Alliance, you are just a general under me. Other than that, you are nothing. Do you understand? I understand. I will obey your orders. Commander Marcus. Duque waved his hand and someone brought out a beautifully decorated brocade box. Inside was the badge of a major general of the Alliance. Originally, no matter how noble Jaina's identity was, she would not be able to get the rank of Major General. This was the agreement between the various countries when the Alliance was first established. After the king entered the Alliance, his rank would be general. Only the successor of the royal family of each country would be a brigadier general after entering the Alliance. Other nobles would not be given the rank of general unless they had more than 5,000 soldiers. Naturally, there was another reason why Jaina could become a major general in one leap. The Dalajan city has been destroyed. The original Kirin Tor Council must be reorganized. His Excellency Sunstrider has chosen to return to Xueqi as an elf. His Excellency Krasis and the other Dalajan mages have clearly expressed their wish for me to take over the position of chairman. I think the Kirin Tor Council needs more outstanding mages to lead the explorers of magic out of the darkness. Jaina, let me ask you, are you willing to accept the position of Kirin Tor Council member and the position of Major General of the Alliance? As Duque spoke, he observed Jaina. The current situation in the Dalajan was very different from the original history. It turned out that Antonida's death in battle had caused a power vacuum. However, because Ronan had saved the Red Dragon Queen, even if Ronan was not very strong, Ronan had been the one to take control of the Kirin Tor Parliament. In this life, Duque had appeared out of nowhere. Regardless of whether it was Duque's identity, strength, or actual achievements, it was too easy for him to inherit the position of chairman of the Dalajan. If not for Duque's insistence on his identity as the Storm Duke, Perhaps everyone would have called Duque Chairman Dakin Tor instead. Even so, the power of the Dalajan had actually fallen into the hands of Duque and Krasis. Considering Krasis' identity as a giant dragon, the Dalajan was now Duque's word. 10 years could easily change anyone. He did not know how Jaina had grown. Had she grown up crooked, or was she as F***ed as the girl who sold her father in history? Thus, Duque's offer of the position of Major General and Kirin Tor Council member was more of a test. Chapter 774. Duque was never a cynical person, and he wouldn't look at everyone who got close to him with hostility. If it wasn't for the fact that Jaina was famous for selling her father, Duque wouldn't have been so wary of Jaina. On the other hand, she didn't continue her relationship with Arthas. When Second Fool fell, Jaina didn't stay by Second Fool's side either. Similarly, because she grew up in a different place, Jaina lived in the Elven Forest when she grew up to be a mature beauty. Jaina didn't have any interactions with Kai Z either. He changed Jaina's growth history and made her waste 10 years of her youth with the title of Duke Marcus's fiancée. Women in the mortal world didn't have many decades, let alone the golden 10 years from 18 to 28. During a woman's most beautiful and blooming period, Jaina was equivalent to being a widow for Duque. Regardless of how much Jaina loved him, at least she didn't give up on the engagement and remarry, nor did she have a scandal with some handsome man. Duque's feelings were complicated. Under such circumstances, he should give Jaina a chance. Duke made a decision. As long as Jaina's temperament was not crooked, or if she did something too excessive, she should be given an eternal life slot no matter what. Beauty shouldn't stay in an empty house. Talents shouldn't be wasted. Heroes shouldn't be sad. If you love power, I'll give you a chance to reach the peak. If you love power, I'll give you a battlefield to show your skills. As long as you don't go against the path of justice and the path of the alliance, so what if you have a little selfishness? After 10 years, Duque had matured and become more magnanimous. After all, this was the bearing that a person who led the alliance to glory should have. Duque was testing Jaina, but he didn't know that he was shaking Jaina's heart on a different level, making her unable to extricate herself. Humans had a certain aura about them. If a person is timid and calculative, he will not mix well, and no woman will like him from the bottom of their hearts. On the other hand, if he appeared with a majestic gait, bright eyes, and was able to accurately pinpoint the position of himself and others with just a few sentences, then the others would definitely be shocked by his courage. Duque, who had led 2 battles at the Door of Darkness, had once again shone brilliantly in the 3rd battle at the Door of Darkness. Duque didn't realize how powerful his aura was. However, Jaina. It was as if a strange switch had been turned on. In the 15 years that Duque had known Jaina, this was the first time he had seen Jaina reveal such a fanatical and intoxicated expression. Obviously, it was not about the matter, but about the person who was infatuated with him, Duque. Jaina lifted the edge of her armor and performed a standard ladylike bow. If accepting the position of Kirin Tor Parliament member and the position of Major General of the Alliance is your wish, then I will gladly accept. Jaina gave an extremely obedient and pleasing answer. The meaning behind her words was clear. I don't really want to be a savior, it's purely because I'm yours, so I'll listen to everything you say. No matter which man heard this answer, all the pores on his body would feel extremely comfortable, as if he had eaten a ginseng fruit. Also, because of the ladylike bow, her body was slightly lower. Duque, who was dazzled by Jaina's white weapons, was almost worried that his corium or dog eyes would go blind. Ugh! Duque's facial muscles stiffened a little. He finally showed signs of losing his composure. Beside Jaina, Mag snickered in her heart, while Mograine and Abendis, who were not far behind Duque, had their eyelids twitching. The 2 old fellows looked at each other and saw the worry in each other's hearts. This is not good. They had heard that Duque and Jaina were at odds. He had kept her by his side for many years and refused to touch Jaina. After Kalia urgently became the queen, these 2 loyal Lordaeron ministers were still dreaming of the queen marrying Duque. Now they were in trouble. Firstly, Jaina was still Duque's official fiancée. Secondly, Duque seemed to like heroines who could fight and work the most. They still remembered that Duque had gone to Lordaeron many times a decade ago. There were at least 1,000 beautiful noble ladies who had flirted with Duque in Lordaeron, but Duque didn't even look at them, and there weren't even any scandals. The only real lovers he had were the High Elves Windrunner sisters. Then, he didn't care about Princess Kalia, who was worshipped as a goddess by all of Lordaeron. Mograine and Abendis had secretly asked the experienced female officials, and the conclusion they got was that Queen Kalia seemed to still be a virgin. These two old fellows were now having a headache. However, with a super strong enemy like Arthas in front of them, the two old fellows naturally couldn't do anything. Back, on this side, after Duque exchanged a few words with Jaina, he didn't forget to give Aegwyn a warning. Duque, let me introduce you. This is Madame Magna Xueqi, a magic consultant that I discovered by chance. Hello, Lord Marcus. Magna pretended to salute. Unfortunately, for a transmigrator like Duque, spoilers couldn't be easier. Hello, Madame Xueqi. When Duque finished speaking, he suddenly used the language of the wind that he learned from Aurelia and said, "Thank you for taking care of Jaina all these years, Madame Aegwyn. Thank you also for the gift that Medivh left me. It's a pity that Karazhan can't return for the time being." Aegwyn shuddered. Of course, as a former guardian and a super smart person who had lived for thousands of years, she was definitely very experienced. I heard that Karazhan is still trapped in the void. If there's a chance, I would like to pay a visit. It's indeed a bit of a pity now. However, I believe that Karazhan can only truly display his value in your hands. Aegwyn's answer made Duque heave a sigh of relief. Medivh had been resurrected. If one day Karazhan returned to Azeroth, and Medivh wanted to take it back, it would be really difficult to deal with. There will be a chance. After answering on the surface, Duque said in the language of the wind, "Thank you, Medivh has always been the person I admire the most. I look forward to that day. However, Sir Marcus, who has inherited the Guardian's will let Karazhan return in the future, won't he?" Aegwyn's subtext was, "As long as you continue to fulfill your duties as a Guardian, Karazhan will be yours." There will be such a day. Duque smiled. Finally, Duque had settled the troublesome combination of Jaina and Magna. Then, in the evening of the same day, Duque welcomed another wave of reinforcements. "I declare that from now on, if you enter or leave Duque's tent, you have to ask me first," said the lady with long white legs. Jaina's eyelids twitched wildly. Chapter 775. 4 long-lived races. 10 years was just the blink of an eye. Elves and dragons were indifferent to the concept of time. Humans were different. 10 years was Jaina's youth, but it was also Vanessa Van Cleve's youth. Stormwind in this period of history was very corrupt and declining. The Stormwind royal family had a lot of broken promises and rewards that were written off. For example, after the restoration of the country, the Stormwind royal family refused to pay for the reconstruction of Stormwind City paid by the Stonemason Brotherhood because of the conspiracy of a dragon princess. This directly led to a major tragedy for Vanessa's father, Edwin Van Cleve, the Mason Brotherhood, and a lot of people who worked hard but did not get paid. In her original fate, Vanessa spent her childhood in the depths of the sunless dead mines in such a dark, terrifying, and painful environment. Her father and the people around her were struggling with anger and despair. Of course, they couldn't teach her anything good about Stormwind City. Even if they didn't tell her anything, it was enough for her to slowly develop an indelible hatred for Stormwind City. In this life, the appearance of Duque changed everything. Her father, Edwin, from a lowly stonemason leader, became one of the 2 great heroes fighting against the orcs in the western wilderness. Although not as famous as Duque, that glory was real in Stormwind. "Ah, you are the daughter of that Edwin Van Cleef. You are so skilled. You are indeed the daughter of a hero." If she was a boy, she might be like Alexandros Mograine's son, living in her father's shadow. After all, boys inherited the family business. But she was a girl, and did not have that kind of pressure. If there was pressure, it was. Her father Edwin could not find a man who could marry his daughter. In terms of status, because Edwin followed Duque, he jumped from a lowly stonemason to a knight, and was directly promoted to a viscount. He was an important minister of the Marcus family. In terms of official position, Edwin was the Minister of Construction under the Minister of Internal Affairs, and almost all the infrastructure projects in Stormwind City were led by him. Logically speaking, the Van Cleve family was already very prominent. That was where the problem lay. The nobles could accept a poor lad with no background stepping into the circle of nobles just because he grasped the mysterious power. After all, the inheritance of the magic circuit itself was a priceless treasure. However, the nobles definitely did not like a bumpkin without any special talent becoming a noble in a single step. Under normal circumstances, only knights who had been knights for at least 2 generations would be more easily accepted by the noble circle. The nobles of Stormwind had withered a lot because of Du's betrayal during the Great Retreat, but the old nobles, such as Balver's for Dragon family, and the new nobles promoted by Lang, still did not like Van Cleef. In the end, the only people who could accept Vanessa were the members of the Marcus family. Then, in a duel 5 years ago, Vanessa used her beautiful dagger to defeat old Fan's favorite, the knight Captain Cassar. With 12 consecutive hits, Vanessa, with her fierce reputation, could no longer marry. Having participated in the Battle of the Dark Portal, Vanessa, who was used to seeing great heroes, naturally had high standards. She did not care whether she married or not. "Father, you're still young. If you want the Van Cleef family to continue, you can marry another woman. In the future, give me a younger brother or sister to be the heir. Don't worry about me." Edwin finally realized that his precious daughter, who had traveled extensively with Princess Kalia for 10 years, was no longer that obedient little girl, but a true powerhouse. This time, when Edwin heard of Duque's grand return, and the instigation of a queen who had fled to Stormwind City to seek refuge, he immediately sent his daughter. A member of the Van Cleef family is a member of the Marcus family in life, and a member of the Marcus family in death. Master Duque has just returned, and is in need of help. Since you were Master's maid before, and now have Her Majesty Kalia's permission, you should serve Master. Edwin spoke righteously on the surface, but in fact, he was overjoyed to send his daughter to the North Stream coast by boat. Together with Vanessa were the female high elf knight Riadeline and the 4th child of the Windrunner family, Lilith. They were originally sent by Duque to be Kalia's companions, to accompany the bitter Kalia in enjoying freedom. Strictly speaking, they were all Duque's subordinates. After 10 years of living together, they were once again branded with Kalia's mark. Sending them back when Kalia was pushed out by Duque to take power naturally had a different meaning. Duque did not care. After disappearing for 10 years, Elucia was still helping him manage his territory and power, and Duque was already very grateful. Especially Edwin Van Cleef. After Elucia secretly pointed out that if not for the Marcus family, Stormwind City would not have been able to pay for the construction of the city, Edwin completely cut off his thoughts of the Stormwind nobility, and became the most fervent supporter of the Marcus family. In any case, it was more convenient to use his own people. Since Vanessa wanted to come back and be the head maid, Duque let her be. After all, she was now a single commander, without a single maid. Lilith stepped into the realm of heroes without a sound, and could be considered to have 70% of Aurelia's combat power back then. On the other hand, the enemy was an undying. Without a holy knight by his side, Duque felt a little weak. Riadeline's arrival was obviously a great help. The only thing that Duque did not expect was that Vanessa blocked Jaina as soon as she arrived. Duque rubbed his eyebrows. "Vanessa, in the future, Jaina can enter my tent or room without permission unless there are special circumstances." When Duque's voice came from the tent, Vanessa reluctantly moved aside. Even if she was a little unhappy about being blocked, Vanessa's agile movements made Jaina look up to her. However, Vanessa was dressed in a tight-fitting outfit doing the work of a maid. Coupled with that special lithe charm, this made Jaina a little jealous. It seemed that Kalia was not her only competitor. Jaina lightly pursed her lips, and then entered with a dignified demeanor. "Duque, this time I'm here." Duque saw through Jaina's thoughts at a glance and waved his hand. "Defeating the Calamity Army is the most important thing. Once the Calamity Army attracts the Burning Legion's commander, Archimonde, the world will be destroyed. At that time, all glory and status will be illusory. Come and help me look over it. Now that bastard Anastrian has given me a difficult problem." Chapter 776. Jaina was a little confused at first when Duque called the king a jerk, but she was soon delighted. This meant that Duque finally did not treat her as an outsider. Well, she just did not treat him as an outsider. Jaina still had a long way to go before she could become someone close to Duque, or even an official wife. After asking a little, Jaina found out why Duque was so angry. She did not know if she should praise Anastrian Sunstrider. This old bastard was indeed a super-veteran politician who had lived for thousands of years. This great Sun King in the eyes of the elves was also very good at playing politics. Although the High Elves were all proud of themselves and had serious isolationism, this did not mean that the elves were all idiots. On one hand, They had an irrational obsession and confidence in their newly built magic defense arrays. On the other hand, the psychological trauma caused by the last war still made their hearts ache. Originally, in the Second Battle of the Dark Portal, the elves only burned the outer Long Song Forest. In this life, the elves suffered much more under the misfortune of fate. More than half of the Long Song Forest was burned by Orgrim, and they lost 2 battles. 300,000 soldiers and civilians died, and were even beaten to Silvermoon City. This was far more shocking to the elves than the original history. Because they did not want to be bullied by Tyreenas, Xueqi and Gilnis took the opportunity to leave the alliance while Deathwing was pretending to be the Lord of Presto. Also, because of the constant friction between Xueqi and Rotterdam in the past 10 years, the High Elves were very unhappy with the alliance. So, after Xueqi returned and issued a warning, Xueqi did not have any intention of returning to the alliance at all. Okay, here came the problem. The High Elves could be unhappy with the alliance and ignore Tyreenas, but they did not dare to completely ignore Xueqi's warning. 14 years ago, Xueqi let Aurelia go back to Xueqi first to issue a warning, but no one was willing to listen. In the end, the elves suffered a great loss. As a result, the Sun King had a twisted mentality that he didn't want to come back and lick the alliance's boots, but he was also afraid that something would happen. Under the suggestion of his aides, Anastrian came up with an evil plan. He had the rangers who had been on good terms with Servanas in the past, the current ranger generals, write letters to Servanas, expressing their unease about the situation and the fear that Eversong Forest would once again be burned down. As the saying goes, it's hard to leave one's homeland. After receiving letters from Rothelma Theron, Hadgeron Brightwing and the others, Sylvanas made a decision. She would temporarily return to Xueqi as an elf. Xueqi had read the handwritten letter countless times. Every time he read it, Xueqi would get angry. Xueqi, I'm very happy to hear that you're alive. How are big sister and third sister? They should be fine. Otherwise you would have informed me and Lilith. Thank you for taking us away from Xueqi, so that we don't have to deal with those bastards of the Silver Moon Council anymore. In these 10 years, Elucia and the others have been very good to me and Lilith, and I've been living a good life. Then came the twist. However, when I heard that Xueqi was once again in danger, I suddenly found that I couldn't control myself. The elven forest is good, but the trees here are too short. They will never grow as tall as the trees in Eversong Forest. Even if they are as tall, it will not be my Eversong Forest. The 2,000 years I spent in Eversong Forest left an indelible mark in my soul. If I were to see the Eversong Forest destroyed again and do nothing, I would never forgive myself. Reading this, Xueqi was already depressed. 10 years was too short for a high elf who had a lifespan of thousands of years. Moreover, he, Aurelia and Sasha were not around, and Sylvanas had no sense of belonging to the elven forest. Please forgive my willfulness. I decided to go back on my own, and it has nothing to do with Sun King or my friends. Since Big Sister could become a hero in the Troll War and be worshipped by the world, I definitely should not lose to her. If the Eversong Forest is invaded again, I will either return as a heroine who can stand shoulder to shoulder with Big Sister, or let me die in my favorite forest. Xueqi also showed this letter to Jaina. Xueqi was silent. He began to understand why Sylvanas in history would fight to the death in Eversong Forest. She first completely angered Arthas, and was killed. Then, she became a Banshee of Death, and finally became the Forgotten Queen. First, the desire to protect her home and country strongly dominated her will. Second, the competitive and rebellious heart made her decide to fight to the death. After all, in the original history, Big Sister happened to go missing in the Outland, and Third Sister was delayed in the Dalagen because of something important. After reading the letter, Jaina sighed. Lady Sylvanas has always had a personality and a mind of her own. She is not the kind of person who can be persuaded to come back. Moreover, we are in no position to persuade her to come back. However, she doesn't need to join the alliance, but wants the alliance to be Xueqi's backup. Sun King is quite shrewd. This was the ruthlessness of the Sun King. The old fox, Anastrian, knew the relationship between Xueqi and Aurelia, but still sent Sylvanas to the southernmost front line of the Eversong Forest with great fanfare. If Xueqi was unwilling to rescue Xueqi and let Sylvanas die in battle, then Xueqi's harem would definitely be on fire, and it would be the 2 biggest fires. On the other hand, if Xueqi sent an army, then the High Elves could be said to be able to attack and retreat as they pleased. If the Calamity Army could not break in, then the High Elves could stay in the safety of the magic array and brag about how awesome their magic array was. Then, even if the 200,000 Alliance troops stayed on the sea and had nothing to eat, the High Elves would not have to pay a single copper coin for military expenses or owe any favors. They did not ask the Alliance to come, and the High Elves did not belong to the Alliance. If they dared to come in, it would be trespassing on the territory of the Xueqi Salas. If the Calamity Army was really that powerful and broke the new magic array of the High Elves, then they could still call for help at the critical moment. And they would be on call at any time. The sister-in-law of the commander of the Alliance is still in our hands. Are you coming to rescue her? Xueqi looked at Jaina's bright face. He was asking for Jaina's opinion. Jaina took a deep breath. She knew that it was time to test him again. If Xueqi Salas is unwilling to sign the harsh treaty and join the Alliance again, then we will only save Lady Sylvanas. Xueqi's eyes sharpened, and his pupils constricted. Unknowingly, his lips were already bleeding from biting. As expected, it still has to be like this. Chapter 777. Gianna was very smart. If she was a foolish woman, she might be happy to see her rival in love suffer. Gianna was obviously not foolish. She was not arrogant enough to challenge Aurelia, who had been with Xueqi for 15 years, and Windsor, who had been with him for 13 years. If the elven sisters attacked together, they would have additional attributes. Moreover, the kings of this era never lacked lovers. Not to mention, didn't her father, King Del Lin, have a Gina gold sword by his side? What she pursued was only the position of Xueqi's wife in name. Publicly, she could not force Xueqi to do something foolish and use the entire alliance for personal gain. Privately, she could not tempt Xueqi to give up on Sylvanas. Her suggestion was very pertinent. Xueqi could not help but give Gianna a thumbs up in his heart. At this moment, Xueqi suddenly raised his voice. Are you satisfied with this result? Gianna was shocked. Clearly, Xueqi did not say it for her to hear. Indeed, from the corner of the tent, a blurry figure quietly appeared. Then, Gianna recognized the woman as the fourth child of the Windrunner family, Lilith. For once, Lilith's expressionless face showed a rare look of joy. Thank you, brother-in-law. She did not know that her words were equivalent to stabbing a certain female mage in the chest. Gianna had been shot while lying down. If Gianna flared up, then she would have lost. If she pinched her nose and admitted it, then she would have lost. If she did not express any opinion, then she would have lost. She could only show an awkward expression and use her eyes to complain to Xueqi. I am also very desperate. Technically, I am your fiancé. Why don't you just give me a quick death? Xueqi also had a headache. He also felt that he was a bastard. Logically speaking, he should have rejected Gianna cleanly. However, Elucia had privately advised him not to show his cards at this time. The alliance was now weak enough. If they still became enemies with Curtilas, even on the surface, it would not be a good thing for the alliance. At the end of the day, Lilith's facial paralysis was a trap. Taking a deep breath, Xueqi called Lilith over. I can't go to Xueqi Salas right now. This was a political game between the alliance and the Elf Kingdom. Whoever begged the other first would lose. Inviting Xueqi Salas, who had authority over the other member states, into the alliance would eventually lead to the collapse of the alliance. I am responsible for the entire alliance. So, it's up to you to ensure your second sister's safety. Do it for me. Xueqi used the whisper of the wind that he learned from Aurelia to explain to Lilith. Then, Lilith took the things that Xueqi gave her and left. As soon as he finished giving instructions, Mograine, Abendis, Kale Vats, and a group of generals from the Rotterdam Kingdom paid a visit together. Seeing Lilith leave and Jaina, who was sitting in Xueqi's tent, the big shots of the alliance were a little surprised. The people of the Rotterdam Kingdom were naturally a little jealous. Kale Vats said apologetically, I'm sorry, Xueqi. My father seems to have reappointed Lady Sylvanas as a ranger general, and is in charge of guarding the southern front lines of the Long Song Forest. There was no such thing as an impenetrable wall in the world, not to mention that the old fox, the Sun King, was forcing Xueqi to be biased. Xueqi sighed. The Calamity Army is the most terrifying enemy that the humans, elves, dwarves, and gnomes have ever faced in history. I despise His Majesty Anastrian for refusing to join the alliance at such a time and still playing such underhanded tricks. Xueqi's words made Kale Vats blush. He just wanted to find a hole to hide in. Xueqi continued, "The Alliance will not give in because of Sylvanas. Not in the past, and not in the future. This topic ends here. What we need to discuss now is how to evacuate the refugees in the Rotterdam Kingdom and fight against the Calamity Army." Xueqi's conclusion made Mograine and the other generals of the Rotterdam Kingdom heave a sigh of relief. After an emergency discussion, Xueqi made a decision that seemed fair, but could actually be turned into a selfish one at any time. Due to the support of courtiers and the 30,000 soldiers, and the fact that reinforcements would arrive one after another, and that there were more and more immortals near the border of the Silver Pine Forest and the Tirisful Woodland, it became more and more difficult for the refugees to escape to the west. Xueqi led the Scarlet Cross Legion and the new Dalajan mages to open up new landing grounds in the northwest and north of the Tirisful Woodland, respectively, to evacuate the refugees. Anyone with a discerning eye could tell that Xueqi had actually placed the main force of the Scarlet Cross Legion on the north coast. It was only a day's journey from the Elven territory by boat. In addition, Xueqi had made the Scarlet Cross Legion basically not disembark, so there was no need for them to even assemble. However, in terms of politics, Xueqi's way of doing things was flawless. He was saving people. Moreover, the Alliance's strength was in the sea. No matter how powerful the Calamity Army was, they still did not have an organized navy. I'm making full use of my strengths. On the other hand, the defense near the Door of Darkness was handed over to Danath Trollbane. Turayan was promoted to General of the Alliance, and he was to lead Marcus's 40,000 private troops led by Windsor. A total of 100,000 troops set off from the Reed coast. It was estimated that they would be able to reach the easternmost part of the old Rotterdam Kingdom in about a week, which was now called the Eastern Plaguelands. There was a tunnel there that Xueqi had arranged before he disappeared, and it took a full 3 years to dig. This tunnel was located to the south of Tyr's Hand. Once they came out of it, they would arrive at the newly built port of Tyr. Not far to the south of Port of Tyr was the sea cliff area where the orcs had landed during the Second Door of Darkness. There were more than 100,000 murlocs there, and they were all Xueqi's subordinates. By the order of Her Majesty Queen Kalia Menethil, Saiden Dathrahan is promoted to Major General of Rotterdam. He is also promoted to Major General of the Alliance in my name. Let Saiden recruit militia to form the Stratholm defense line to stop the Calamity Army's possible eastward advance. However, all civilians must be evacuated to Tyr's Hand during this period, and gradually evacuated to the southern continent. Let Saiden hold on until Turayan and Windsor arrive. I want them to become nails to block the Calamity Army. Also, once Arthas is seen, Saiden, Turayan and Windsor must immediately retreat at all costs. Arthas has fallen even further. He already has the strength of a demigod. There is no need for me to let the Alliance's best generals die in vain. Xueqi's series of orders allowed everyone to understand Xueqi's intentions. It was still a strategic retreat, but no one knew how long it would last. In particular, Xueqi called Arthas a demigod. This word pierced deeply into everyone's hearts. At this moment, Xueqi suddenly said to Mograine, "Mograine, His Majesty Magni Bronzebeard has sent a letter. He hopes that you, the strongest paladins, will make a trip to Iron Furnace Castle." Chapter 778. 2 days ago, Magni Bronzebeard had been at the front lines of South Sea City. One of the reasons he had personally led the army against the Scourge was because of the death of his second brother, Muradin Bronzebeard. After receiving the news that Arthas had returned and had possibly caused the death of his second brother, Muradin, Magni was filled with rage and almost went crazy. So, after receiving Xueqi's news, he had mobilized his army at once to attack the Scourge across the sea. But very quickly, Magni realized that the dwarven cannons, which had been invincible in the previous battle, felt weak for the first time. Fierce cannon fire could indeed destroy those brainless zombies and ghouls, and blast those filthy undead creatures into pieces. Unfortunately, it didn't solve the root of the problem. As long as there were liches behind the Scourge, these evil beings could keep using dark magic to reassemble the shattered corpses into new undead to continue attacking the Alliance's defense line. Just because matter was conserved, the number of undead had to be reduced every time they were reassembled. Otherwise, there would be no need to fight this battle. Many times, Magni felt that his own cannons and tanks weren't as powerful as the paladins and priests. A single exorcism, or God's wrath, would kill a large number of undead. No matter what the liches and necromancers did, they couldn't revive the bone dregs. The dwarven cannons were excellent, But Magni felt that it was far from enough. This couldn't quell the rage in his heart, the rage of losing his own brother. So he sent a letter to Xueqi, asking Xueqi to send a few powerful paladins over. He wanted to personally build a few powerful paladins that could be used against the undead and Arthas. Seeing that letter, Xueqi's heart skipped a beat, and then he felt a little strange. But the cunning Xueqi wouldn't expose him. Hearing that Xueqi wanted him to go to Steel Stove Castle, Mograine instinctively wanted to refuse. "I'm leaving. What about the Blood Cross?" "Mograine," Xueqi said leisurely, "do you remember how you couldn't fight Arthas at all?" Hearing that, Mograine's face heated up, and then turned to rage. He believed that his martial arts skills were definitely superior to that treacherous son of Arthas, that traitor to humanity. But now that they were face to face, he couldn't do anything to Arthas. There was only one reason: Frostmourne. That divine artifact was too terrifying. It had completely filled up the gap in strength between him and Arthas. No, it had far surpassed him. The difference between Arthas and Qin Yi was akin to the difference between an infant and a grown man. And now, Qin Yi had heard that Arthas had fallen even deeper into depravity after murdering her master, and that she had grown even stronger than before. Her strength alone was more than enough to drive Qin Yi into despair. Mograine was speechless. Xueqi began to bluff. His Majesty Magni Bronzebeard is the strongest blacksmith in the world. If there was anyone who had the chance to create a holy artifact that could fight against Frostmourne, it would definitely be His Majesty Magni. Go, now that Saidan is completely unable to leave. You are already the most suitable paladin under me. Mograine was still hesitating. Xueqi continued, "If it was just the Calamity Army, I'm 90% confident that I can wipe out all those skeletons, but I'm not a god. Even if I'm a Breaking Dawn mage, I still can't fight Arthas. That's why eliminating Arthas is the key to this entire crisis." At this moment Abendis also said, "Go, Alexandros. The Blood Cross still has me." If it was Abendis, Mograine had nothing to worry about. After all, their fiefs were neighbors, and they had been partners for over 20 years. Mograine said helplessly, "All right, I'll go." Xueqi smiled. "Go quickly and come back quickly. If you have any special materials that you think might be suitable for forging weapons, bring them along. They might come in handy." Xueqi's seemingly casual words caused Mograine to sink into deep thought. He rubbed his chin and muttered, "Seems like there really is a special stone." "Then bring it along. You don't know ores, but His Majesty Bronzebeard does." "All right, then. I'll go." Go. Seeing Mograine leave with his orders, Xueqi snickered inwardly. During the War of the Orcs, Alexandros Mograine had killed a dark warlock of the Blackrock tribe and found a shadow crystal on him, the Rizab crystal. In fact, this crystal was the core of the Naru of the Holy Light tribe. After the holy light energy of a Naru was drained, it would automatically turn into a shadow form. This crystal would also be filled with holy light energy after being infused with a large amount of holy light. It seemed that Mograine would hand this crystal to Magni Bronzebeard just like in history, hoping that Magni could use his exquisite forging skills to bring out the power of the crystal's holy light to its fullest. Magni would pour all his grief and resentment towards the Calamity Army into the weapon he was about to forge. Thus, the legendary and most representative weapon of the Holy Knights, Ashbringer, was born. Why did Xueqi not snicker? Because only he, as a transmigrator, knew that Magni's child Muradin, who was rumored to have been hacked to death by two fools, was not dead. At that time, Muradin did not fall. After being knocked down by the power of Frostmourne, Muradin fell into a coma in Northrend for a long time before being rescued by one of the natives of Northrend, the Ice Dwarves. But because of the impact of that knockdown, Muradin did not remember his past at all. Although he lost his memory, he did not lose his fighting strength. Instead, he relied on this fighting strength to help the Ice Dwarves repel the Ice Giants who invaded the territory of the Ice Dwarves, and was elected as the new leader by these Ice Dwarves. Because he lost his memory, he gave himself a new name, Yogg Stormheart. Since then, Muradin led the Ice Dwarves in the home of the Storm Cliffs, Frost Castle, training eagles, catching prey, and fighting against Northrend's harsh nature and ferocious enemies. It was not until a long time later that a small group of dwarves from the Explorers Association stepped into this place and searched for the ruins of the Titans in the mountains of the Storm Cliffs. The leader was Muradin's third brother, Bu Lang Bronzebeard. The ice dwarves helped Bulang escape the siege of the Iron Dwarves, and then met up with the dwarf king Magni, who had come to Northrend to find his younger brother, at Frost Castle. The reunion of the three Bronzebeard brothers awakened Muradin's memory, as well as his gratitude and resentment, love and hate towards Arthas. In the end, the three brothers reunited happily, and then pulled a large group to chase after the second fool. Xueqi did not dare to reveal the truth now. What if Magni did not have the blessing of Princeps Wrath, and could not create Ashbringer? Chapter 779. Of course, as a bastard, no, as a benevolent hero of the Alliance, Xueqi wouldn't be so stupid as to hide it for too long. When Magni finished creating Ashbringer, Xueqi would see the so-called prophecy, which would send the adventurer brewer Lang Bronzebeard on a treasure hunt. Coincidentally, he would pass by the Ice Dwarves' territory. Anyway, he had the legacy of the Mediv. Since the Mediv had become a charlatan, no one would suspect him even if he made a cameo appearance. If he couldn't find it, how could he, Xueqi, be blamed? As the days passed, Xueqi began to wonder if the original history had collapsed. On August 5th, year 15 of the Dark Portal, the Horde finally gathered all the ships and began to cross the sea. Thrall was cautious. He was still wary of the Alliance attacking the Horde's fleets. He ordered the Horde to go out in batches, about 1/10 at a time. Every day, the Horde would go out to sea into 3 groups: north, middle, and south. Without losing their way, they would try their best to split up. The elites of the Frostwolf tribe were responsible for bringing up the rear. To Xueqi's surprise, Jaina was the one who tried to attack the Horde in the dark. She had secretly sent a fleet to destroy one of the Horde's fleets, but Xueqi found out and stopped her. It had to be said that it was a very stupid move. Throughout the history of Earth, those who fought on 2 fronts all died horrible deaths. The Calamity Army was terrifying enough. Since the Alliance hadn't destroyed the Horde in the past 10 years, it would be unwise to attack now. Xueqi was speechless. To prevent Jaina and Thrall from having unspeakable stories, Xueqi had given Jaina a strong dose of medicine in the Tirisful Glades. Now it seemed, the effect was too good. After being caught, Jaina felt wronged. Those green beasts are blocking our way. We only wanted to scare them with our cannons. What Jaina said was partly true. If Xueqi had led the tribe to the west coast of South Shore, perhaps there wouldn't have been such a problem. Unfortunately, the defense line of the South Sea city-state was a nail that Xueqi had ordered Elugia to operate for 10 years in order to deal with the invasion of the Scourge Legion. It was meant to be nailed to the Rotterdam Kingdom to bleed the Scourge Legion. Of course, they couldn't let the tribe pass. Xueqi also wanted the Scarlet Cross to go to Lordaeron as many civilians as possible to evacuate from the old territory of the Lordaeron Kingdom, so he could only take the North Stream coast and leave the South Stream coast to the Horde. On the other side, the crossing of the flight routes was unavoidable. Especially when the transportation volume was so huge, it was even more impossible for there to be no friction. Then, Jaina's fleet appeared and forced the Horde's transport ships to stop. She shouted, "If you green-skinned creatures dare to sail forward again, I'll destroy you." This news was sent to the South Stream coast by the wyverns of the tribe, and Sal was so scared that he almost prepared to attack the North Stream coast. Xueqi only found out about this when Sal trembled with fear, and did not have much hope of finding an envoy to negotiate. "Ah, this emblem. It's Jaina's fleet?" Because Miss Proudmoore was almost killed by the orcs when she was young, she hates the Horde. Now we have a bigger enemy, and there's no reason for us to start a war. All right, I'll try to get Miss Proudmoore to restrain her subordinates, but in the future when you see her emblem, please be careful. The honest and reliable young man Xueqi righteously said that he would control his subordinates, but he decisively fed Sal a mouthful of such *T. You should be careful of Jaina. She really, really hates the Horde. If you fall into the hands of this female devil, be careful that you'll be chopped into 18 pieces. The dark Xueqi spat out fiercely. Let's see if you still dare to flirt with the beauty and the beast in this life. Even if I don't want her, I won't let you, Sal. Have it easy. You still want to be a KFC chicken in heaven, and a pig on earth? Dream on. Xueqi's reply to the Horde's messenger was so sincere that Sal almost believed him. He believed that Xueqi was a great hero with wisdom and foresight, and that he put the big picture first. Unfortunately, Grom Dungeon's roar woke Sal up. If Duke Marcus wasn't the guy who sent millions of orcs to hell, I'd be willing to believe that he's a human who's close to our Horde. Yes. On the entire continent, if Xueqi claimed to be second in terms of the total number of horde kills, no one would dare to claim to be first. To be honest, Xueqi didn't want to be so good to the horde. But the scourge was spreading too fast. Xueqi could only get rid of the horde as soon as possible. Get out! Get out! Scram as far as you can. Xueqi didn't hesitate. The next day, he sent a copy of the scourge's marching map to Sal. He explained directly, the horde can either speed up the migration, or the alliance will start a war with the horde. We may not be able to deal with the scourge, but we can still deal with the horde. This time, Sal really believed him. Without another word, on the 8th of August, they organized the largest crossing of the sea, sending away the remaining 50,000 horde in one go. And on the 10th of August, news came that on the 9th of yesterday, Torrent Fort fell for the second time. Half of the soldiers in the city were slaughtered. Even King Garen Trollbane died in battle and became an undead. Of course, a more general statement was, more than one Torrent Fort Wong family guard confirmed that after the outer city was broken by the scourge, Garen surrendered. What was tragic was that the scourge had no precedent of not killing after surrender. They directly killed Garen and turned him into an undead with only a few pieces of flesh left on his face. It was a pity that Garen was too weak. He couldn't even be a Death Knight, and directly became an ordinary zombie warrior. Only Xueqi knew that in the future, this guy would be a Forsaken in the Earthy Highlands. As soon as this news came out, there was an uproar within the alliance. Xueqi also sighed. As the saying goes, leave a way out for others in the future. In the alliance, after Xueqi's embellishment, it was announced that Garen had died in battle. After all, a dead king could inspire the survivor's will to resist the scourge. On the 12th of August, the main force of the Scarlet Cross landed on the northern coast of Lordaeron and the Whispering Coast, opening up the 3rd and 4th escape routes. At the same time when the entire Earthy Highlands fell and was occupied by the undead, even Magni had to let his third brother, Bulang Bronzebeard, guard the Sodder Bridge to prevent the scourge from invading the south. All the main force of the scourge disappeared overnight. What? You didn't see Arthas, Antonidas, or any of the high-level liches from the Church of the Curses? Xueqi was shocked. Chapter 780. There had to be a reason for this abnormality. The Calamity Army's offensive seemed extremely violent, wave after wave. On all fronts, zombies, skeletons, and ghouls seemed to be as numerous as the stars in the sky, and it would take a lifetime to wipe them all out. Urgent letters asking for help from all over flew to the major cities like snowflakes and were then gathered to Xueqi. There was so much news that the mages in charge of magic messaging almost collapsed. Most of them were requests to increase the quota of FFF flamethrowers. After actual combat testing, a new type of portable flamethrower, as long as there was enough fuel, could replace a squadron of militia. Xueqi did not care about these details and directly let his subordinates make arrangements. As a commander, he had to grasp the overall situation. As long as he grasped the essence through appearances and controlled the direction of the overall situation, everything else was just a side issue that could be left to the generals below. However, as a transmigrator, how could Xueqi continue to lead the alliance forward when the history he was familiar with began to become a little unreliable? That night, Jaina saw a scene that shocked her to the core. She was even convinced by it. On the flagship of the Kurtira's navy on the northern coast, in Xueqi's main cabin, more than 100 magic eyes floated in the air, constantly sweeping over the reports, and then more than 200 magic hands constantly flipping through the pages of military intelligence reports. This was not a report at the army level, and Jaina even caught a glimpse of several reports from local guerrillas. O god of mages, is he still human? Mages could directly reflect what they observed into their minds through the magic eyes, but it was generally limited to one magic eye. Opening two magic eyes at the same time was like looking at two completely different images with the left and right eyes at the same time. The brain would directly overlap the images, and the eyes would be extremely confused. How could Xueqi read 100 reports at the same time? Just hearing the noisy flipping of the pages, Jaina felt like she was hearing a tsunami. Could this be the strength of a Breaking Dawn mage? However, when she visited Antonidas before, Jaina clearly remembered that Antonidas did not behave so inhumanly. Jaina took a deep breath to calm her racing heart. All mages were people with an incomparable thirst for knowledge. Those without curiosity and motivation would never reach the Radiant Moon rank. The current situation in front of Jaina was that Xueqi was like a book that seemed easy to understand but could never be finished. Just when she thought that she had gotten close to Duque, she realized that it was just an illusion. It seemed near but was actually far away. He couldn't catch up no matter how hard he tried. This feeling of anger and envy clung tightly to Jaina. No! I must see Duque's true strength. Besides, with my current identity, it's not offensive at all, Jaina said to herself. After all, she still had the dual titles of Duque's fiancé and disciple. When Jaina carefully walked through the incomparably exaggerated main cabin and arrived at the bedroom that was supposed to be the captain's cabin but was now open for Duque's use, she saw a scene that made her teeth itch. That's right. At first glance, Jaina wished she could bite Duque to death. Duque, who seemed to be working, was lying comfortably on the bed. His head pillowed on the lap of his personal maid, Vanessa. Vanessa, who was dressed in a black and white maid uniform, was gently massaging Duque's temples and other acupuncture points with her nimble and smooth hands. But Jaina was immediately confused. Then what about the 200 hands of magic and eyes of magic outside? Damn it! Is Duque working? Or is he lazing around in his bed? Jaina stood at the door, dumbfounded. While Jaina was punishing herself by standing, Vanessa did not look at Jaina again, except for the first time when Jaina appeared at the door. Instead, she used her hands, which were so fast that the naked eye could not follow, to massage Duque very comfortably. That slut, Duque, was actually moaning in pleasure. This made Jaina's face and ears turn red. Even so, Jaina did not interrupt Duque. She waited quietly for Vanessa to finish massaging his head and neck. After a while, Duque finally opened his eyes. Oh, Jaina, thank you for not interrupting my rest. I've been carrying a heavy burden on my shoulders recently. Duque was speaking the truth. The alliance was at its weakest at this point in time. In the previous war, although the 11 countries of the alliance had many leaders, it was undeniable that many kings and commanders were fierce fellows. Not to mention the likes of Tyrrhenas and Eden, there were also the likes of Salas, Del-Lin, Anduin, and Antonidas. As long as they could coordinate with each other, they would be able to hold their own in the outside world. Now, some had withdrawn from the alliance, and some had retired due to illness. Out of the 11 countries that were at their peak, only Dai-Lin, Magni, and Cudrin were still in their prime. Now that William had yet to mature, and Mograine and Turallion were too single-minded, it was hard for them to take control of the overall situation. The burden naturally fell on Duque. The only fortunate thing was that Duque had saved more of the elites of the Rotterdam kingdom than in history. Duque's rest and heavy responsibility immediately stunned Jaina. All the doubts and dissatisfaction in her heart were gone, and all that was left was admiration. Jaina pursed her lips lightly. Duque, you've worked hard. Duque waved his hand pretentiously. It's all right. For the sake of Azeroth and the happiness of mankind, this is a small matter. Well, if Jaina knew that Duque had completely let the system elf control the hand of magic and the mage's eye to gather intelligence, and that he was really corrupt, would he be beaten to death? At this time, Abendus suddenly came into the front hall, holding a large stack of intelligence newspapers in his hand. Duque, the latest news, the Dark Dean, Gondin, has been resurrected, and has led 500,000 undead troops to the west to attack the territory of Gilnis. Then, Antonidas reappeared in front of the South Sea Kingdom's defense line for a while, and then disappeared. Arthas also briefly appeared in the north of Sodder Bridge. Jaina couldn't help but say, now the pressure is all on the south of the Rotterdam Kingdom, and our elite troops are doing nothing in the north. Is this really good? Duque raised a finger. First, saving the refugees is our top priority. The people are the soldiers, and the people are our hope. To some extent, exchanging some of the elite soldiers for the lives of the people is equivalent to exchanging part of the present for the future. Even if you look at it as a commander, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Duque raised a second finger. Second, what you see is not necessarily true. And there is always only one truth. Chapter 781. There can only be one truth. After Duque finished reciting the lines, he was shocked and thought to himself, that was close. I actually recited the lines of the Grim Reaper. He rubbed the back of his head and sighed. Wherever he went, the dead would follow. Ugh, he could be considered half a Grim Reaper now. After complaining to himself, Duque raised his head, his eyes glowing. All right, pass down the highest order of the Alliance. I order. the Dark Portal, 19th of August, year 15. The Alliance seemed to have made a decision that outsiders thought was extremely stupid. The main force of the Scarlet Cross, which had been stationed at the northern coast and looked like they were going to reclaim Lordaeron's capital, actually left by ship after staying for a week. It was said that because the undead army led by Jaydin had entered the Silverpine Forest and threatened the evacuation of the refugees at the northern coast, they had no choice but to redeploy their troops south. This kind of deployment was taboo for military strategists. Even their own people were shocked, not to mention outsiders. Both Magni and Turayan, who had just arrived at the Eastern Plaguelands, were so shocked that they almost bit their tongues. Was this still the same Xueqi who used to be a god of war? Saidan frowned. Turalian. Should we question the commander? Turayan, who was over 30 years old, had long lost his youthful aura. After becoming an uncle, he had become more mature and liked to think deeply. After a while, Turayan shook his head. No need. Look, Xueqi had just returned, and he had already won a great battle against the Scourge and the Orcs. This amazing control proves that Xueqi is still the magical Xueqi. We just have to do our own things. Saidan shrugged. Our defensive line is good enough. Look, before you came, I had people repair the northern sentry tower. Turayan stroked his beard. Then go and check on the nobles. Every noble will have to take one of your exorcism. If they are spies from the Church of the Damned, then we'll be in big trouble. Saidan whistled. Good idea. In Iron Furnace Castle, Magni looked at the worried Alexandros Mograine and smiled. I know Xueqi. He also trusted Xueqi. He won't let us down. We can only trust him. Mograine nodded vigorously. The big shots on the Alliance's side all voted for Duke. The big shots outside the Alliance couldn't sit still anymore. The southern part of the Silverpine Forest was now shrouded in terror. The undead of the Scourge formed a sea of rot that easily drowned the territory of Gilneas outside the Grey Main Wall. Not even a blade of grass could grow. In the magic mirror, King Xeon saw that the lush Silverpine Forest had turned into a black wasteland where even insects could not survive. He cursed angrily. Duke, you little bastard, can't your main force come faster? Erigel bowed and reminded King Xeon, Your Majesty, we are no longer part of the Alliance. Commander Marcus is under no obligation to rescue Gilneas. Shut up. I know. Xeon was not the only one with a bad feeling. When he heard that Duke had led his main force away from the borders of Quell the Loss, the Sun King Anastrian immediately flew into a rage. With one hand, he melted the goblet in his hand that was made of pure gold and inlaid with many precious gems. This news made Kael, who was trying to persuade his father, speechless. Extremely pure fire elements flowed on the old palm of the Sun King, melting the last trace of gold between his fingers. After a while, the Sun King spoke. My child, didn't you say that I was despicable before? You actually used Sylvanas' love for the motherland to use Xueqi through personal relations to force Xueqi, the supreme power of the Alliance, to help us kill Salas? Kael was speechless. Now you see? There is no such thing as a saint in this world. At the end of the day, the so-called hero of the first two battles of the Dark Portal, Duke Marcus, is just a person who prioritizes human interests. He doesn't really want to help us High Elves. When the Sun King said this, Kael, finally could not help but interrupt his father. That's because Quell Salas is not in the Alliance, and the Alliance has no obligation to help us. Even when Xueqi returned, you never expressed your willingness to return to the Alliance. Anastrian was enraged as well. He knocked the end of his luxurious king's scepter onto Kael, shoulder armor. Although it did not hurt, the strong impact made Kael, feel humiliated. Only the elders of the High Elves would use this method to discipline their underage children. However, Kael, was over 1,000 years old. This meant that his father did not recognize him as an adult elf at all. The Sun King's roar shook the entire inner palace. My stupid child. Listen up. No elf would be willing to join the alliance that wants the noble elves to submit to the humans. Your ancestor, Duresma Sunstrider, did not build a country on this continent to make the High Elves human servants. You want to join the alliance? Yes. But it must be Quell Salas who is the alliance leader. Kael, was dumbfounded. He could not believe it. Was this the troll hero who personally announced an alliance with the humans 2,800 years ago, enlisted the help of the humans, and finally defeated the trolls to obtain Quell Salas, the home of the High Elves? The Sun King continued to hit Kale, that's shoulder with his scepter. The heavy impact made Kale, that's kneel involuntarily. Open your eyes, my stupid son. Think about the meaning of the elven throne. Only the inheritance of the high elves is meaningful. No, under extreme circumstances, only the inheritance of the Sunstrider is the only meaning of our existence in this world. Since it was our Sunstrider kingdom that raised Sylvanas, she also has the obligation to die for the Sunstrider family. Anyway, the Windrunner is a traitor. There is nothing wrong with letting the traitor pay with his life. What? What an extremely selfish statement. Is he really my king father? Kale, that was struck by lightning. At this moment, he completely lost the ability to speak. As if realizing that he had hit his son too hard, Anastrian's tone finally softened. He patted his son's shoulder. Of course, as a king, I am generous and benevolent. Since Sylvanas voluntarily returned to Cuel Salis, I will not target her and deliberately send her to her death. I will only arrange for her to go to the front line. If she dies in battle, it only proves that she is incompetent or unlucky. If she makes enough contributions, I do not mind promoting her to the position of Ranger Commander, sitting in her sister's position. Chapter 782. Kale, that didn't know how he walked out of the palace. He felt that some kind of belief was collapsing in his heart. Was this the belief he had believed in for 1,000 years? It wasn't the pursuit of the ultimate in magic, but a simple nostalgia for power and worship of power? So what if Sylvanas reached her sister's position one day? There were only so many high positions in the kingdom, like a transparent pyramid that could be seen from the bottom to the top. However, unless one was an elven mage with a noble bloodline, it was impossible to reach the top. The so-called promotion was just a seemingly beautiful and dirty lie. Looking up at the sky, Kale that sighed. He suddenly realized that he was very envious of humans, especially Xueqi. Because Xueqi, and only Xueqi, with the talent of a commoner, relied on his own ability and wisdom to reach the highest position in the alliance step by step. And he, Kale had the identity of a prince, but could only be controlled by his father like a puppet. Under the constraints of the Silver Moon Council, he could do nothing. The seemingly noble identity was, in fact, worthless. The High Elves were extremely long-lived. Although his father was already at the end of his life, who knew how much longer he could live? As long as his father was still alive, he, the Crown Prince, was just an illusory promise that could not be fulfilled in the field of power. Xueqi, I really envy you. Kale looked up at the sky and sighed again. On the other side, at the southernmost front line of the Long Song Forest, Sylvanas was lost. In the eyes of the two ranger generals, Rothamar Theron and Hadgeron Brightwing, the returned Sylvanas was extremely outstanding. Under her command, the elves worked in full swing to fortify their defenses. It was a method that even the old rangers who had lived for thousands of years had never seen. In the wastelands south of the Long Song Forest, a large area was cleared without grass. It was called the Fire Belt. It was convenient to carry out fire attacks further south. Sylvanas only planted a flag on the hill and decided where to set fire based on the direction of the wind and where the fire would spread. At the source of the river slightly north, a large number of giant ceramic jars were placed, which stored a huge amount of holy water. If the Calamity Army were to cross the river, a few guards would be able to break the jars and give those bones a good laugh. In the forest, Sylvanas began to get someone to make a simple hollow brick. As long as one stayed in the pillbox made of 5 hollow bricks, even the frost arrows of a morning star wizard would not be able to penetrate it. If holy water was sprinkled on it, the mages estimated that it could even resist the shadow arrow of a morning warlock. All of Sylvanas' actions were miraculous in the eyes of the elves. She received a lot of praise. Even though she had been away for 10 years and was half a traitor, she was loved by the rangers almost fanatically, even more than their immediate superiors, Lorthamar and Hadgeron. However, she knew very well that these seemingly simple but extremely effective tricks had nothing to do with her. What she was teaching the Elfins today were all little inventions left behind by Xueqi back then, little creations. She did not know what Xueqi's brain was made of. Originally, in the eyes of the world, the only thing that could fight against mystery was mystery. However, Xueqi had used such a simple and even primitive method to bridge the gap between ordinary people and mysterious beings. What made Sylvanas even more shocked was that, on the surface, these methods were used to defend against the orcs, but from various clues, it could be inferred that Xueqi seemed to have predicted the invasion of the Calamity Army when the war with the Horde ended 13 years ago. Looking into the distance in the south, the reports from the Rangers said that the humans there were still actively organizing a resistance. New human reinforcements had already crossed the sea, and they were rapidly building a continuous line of defense. Logically speaking, even if the Calamity Army were to attack Xueqi, it would not be within the next 1 or 2 months. The High Elves still had plenty of time to prepare for war. However, Sylvanas's mouth was full of bitterness. I will not admit defeat. I want to surpass my sister. I want to break away from Xueqi's protection and make my own career. But what am I doing now? After leaving for more than 10 years, although the influence of the Windrunner was still there, after all, becoming a noble and breaking away from the kingdom was almost treason. When she returned to the forest that she was familiar with and crazy about, all she saw was suspicion and distrust in the eyes of the Rangers. However, she could not leave them alone. More than 10 years was almost a generation for the humans. But for the elves who had not changed for thousands of years, it felt like a relatively long nap. Stubborn. Self-enclosed. Sylvanas was shocked to find that most of the Rangers were still prepared to use wooden arrows to deal with the undying of the Calamity Army. What kind of joke was this? Wooden arrows and whatnot. Even if they hit the zombie's head, so what? As long as the Lich or Necromancer who controlled the low-level Undying was still there, the zombies would still charge with 100 arrows stuck in their bodies. In order to save her hometown, Sylvanas had personally sneaked to the front line of the South Sea city-state before coming here. Physical damage was meaningless against the undead. She tried to persuade the Rangers, but to no avail. In desperation, she took out the method that Xueqi had taught her, using holy light arrows to snipe the enemy leader. Fire and water attacks. Firing towers hanging on the trees and blockhouses on the ground formed a 3-dimensional defense line, crossfire. These new terms, these new battle concepts, all came from Xueqi. Obviously, the defense line of the Long Song Forest was getting stronger day by day, and the chances of defending her hometown were increasing day by day. She should have been ecstatic, but the stronger the defense line was, the more obvious the sense of loss in her heart was, because all these achievements had nothing to do with her. She only stood on the shoulders of the giant Duke Marcus, wantonly plagiarizing and squandering the war wisdom that came from Xueqi. There would be no harm without comparison. After seeing the prosperity of the Elven Forest and witnessing the rapid economic and technological development in Stormwind, Sylvanas felt that if the High Elves did not reform, it would not be too long before they were eliminated by the world. But what did she see? A kingdom that would never change. Although she used to be proud of it, when she thought about it carefully, she was shocked to find that the surnames of the higher-ups of the kingdom had not changed since the founding of the kingdom. 13 years ago, she once swore that if she wanted to find a partner, she would find a hero who would not lose to her sister and third sister. A true hero who was far superior to Xueqi. Unfortunately, looking back at the entire High Elves kingdom, looking at those so-called nobles who were arrogant but did not do anything, Sylvanas only wanted to vomit. Yes. It was still the same sentence. There would be no harm without comparison. Chapter 783. The Dark Portal. 20th of August, Year 15. Duke Bolvar for Dragon, one of the higher-ups of the Alliance, risked his life to teleport directly to Silvermoon City. He formally stated that the Scourge army was the enemy of the world and hoped that Xueqi would join the Alliance again. Bolvar did not make any excessive demands. He did not even mention who would be the leader of the Alliance. He only hoped that the elves would join as equals. In the end, he was unanimously rejected by the Sun King and the Silver Moon Council. Bolvar left angrily on the same day. Because Bolvar's visit was quite formal, most of the elves received the news. The commoners firmly believed in the kingdom's new magical defensive spell formation, how difficult it was to break, and how it could easily turn millions of undying into ashes. The soldiers at the front line, on the other hand, had an unresolvable worry between their brows. The mysteries of magic were not something that Sylvanas, Hadgeron, and Lord Themar, these ranger generals, could understand. But Sylvanas had been under Duke's tutelage for many years. What left the deepest impression on her was, Duke pointed to his chest and said, "The real indestructible defense is here, not any external object. Be it the fortress or the magical spell formation, they are just toys once you master the knack." The new magic defense array that enveloped the Long Song Forest was, after all, An array made of the seemingly inexhaustible mana of the Well of the Sun. Back then, Das Rima Sunstrider had stolen a small bottle of spring water that Illidan had taken from the Well of Eternity to create the Sun Well as a source of magical energy for the High Elves. In the eyes of others, the Sun Well was already an eternal item. However, even the Well of Eternity was not eternal. Could the Sun Well be invincible? This doubt was buried in Savannah's heart. Recently, other than Kale, that's who had managed to sneak out to inspect the front lines, not a single high-ranking mage had appeared in the Long Song Forest. The Silver Moon counselors continued to hold various salons in Silver Moon City every day, forming cliques and attacking their political enemies with trivial matters, fighting for power and profit. Savannah's heart was bleeding. She suddenly had an extremely bad feeling. If the Scourge army found a flaw in the magical spell formation, then Xueqi would be in trouble. And this time, it was very likely that there would be no savior. August 22nd. This day looked no different from the previous 2 weeks. Despite the constant reports from the south, the Doomsday Troop was still very far away from Xueqi. The Holy Light Coalition army formed by Sidon and Turalian managed to keep the Scourge at the Soderil River between the East and West Plaguelands, while the followers of the Church of the Damned in the East Plaguelands were constantly being wiped out. Savannah began to feel a little foolish. She could clearly sense that the guards sent to guard Long Song Forest were seriously slacking off. If it wasn't for the fact that the Rangers were still actively commanding the arcane puppets to construct fortifications outside the forest, it felt like the construction of the defensive system had already come to a halt. Suddenly, he felt his heart palpitate. By the Sun Well, look to the north. All the Rangers around Savannah subconsciously turned around. Their eyes widened, and every pair of eyes was filled with fear. The most sacred place in Xueqi was the Well of the Sun, so the High Elves also worshipped the sun. There were totems of the sun everywhere in the kingdom. However, at this moment, the sky suddenly turned pitch black. The scorching sun had disappeared, and in its place was a black sky covered with ice and snow. A crescent moon emitting a cold and evil aura actually rose near the center of the magic formation. The entire Long Song Forest seemed to resonate with it and trembled slightly. Rustle! The leaves were swaying and the branches were shaking. Obviously, this was not an illusion. This scene. It was as if some ultimate evil existence was descending. Savannah had never seen a moon like this before, but she vaguely felt that she had seen the same scene before. The cold moon was like a scimitar, mercilessly stabbing from below. Theoretically, it should only be an illusory scene, but when it rose, every high elf heard the sound of something breaking. It was not their hearing deceiving them. There was really something in the sky that they did not understand. At first, the speed at which it broke should have been extremely slow, and even the High Elves did not notice it. Soon, in the retinas of the High Elves, something like a crisscrossing glass bridge appeared in the sky above the forest. At first, the glass bridge above the crescent moon was pierced, and slowly cracked into a dozen larger pieces. They did not fall to the trees in the forest like real objects, but slowly separated in mid-air. Then the entire translucent surface appeared densely packed with cracks, and finally burst like a balloon, splitting into countless smaller pieces. They became smaller and smaller, and finally disappeared from the world. At first, Savannah and the other High Elf Ranger generals did not know what this meant until Savannah shuddered, and suddenly came to a realization. Oh no! The magic defense formation is destroyed. A stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. Once it was spoken, the world was shocked. All the High Elves on the line of defense turned pale at this moment. In the center of the original magic formation, a High Elf in noble clothes with the emblem of the Silver Moon Council on his chest cast a spell. In his hands, hundreds of evil black magic runes seemed to have broken free of the Earth's gravity, flying in all directions, and then firmly sticking to the surrounding void with a diameter of more than 50 meters. At a glance, one could see that these runes formed a huge portal comparable to the size of the Dark Portal. In the first few seconds, this huge portal was like a quiet painting, incomparably quiet. A few seconds later, the portal surged with black magic waves, rolling and churning like boiling water. In the next instant, a few wills emitting evil auras descended. Several demon eyes suddenly opened near the portal, and the disgusting evil eyes spun around quickly, scanning everything in the surroundings. On the other side of the portal, several existences began to pass through the void at high speed, pulling out long white, cold tails in the illusory sky. The huge portal was like a volcanic eruption, spewing out countless black shadows straight into the sky. It was as if a black rain had fallen from the sky. At first, there were stars, and then the black dots rapidly grew in size in mid-air. When these dense black dots completely returned to their original form, they had already filled every corner of the forest within a 5-kilometer radius. The Calamity Army. Arthas walked out of the portal with Frostmourne in hand. She tilted her head and revealed an evil smile. Darkan, you did well. Chapter 784. The surrounding space gradually darkened, and everything in his field of vision seemed to be covered in a thick layer of black snow. The cold air emitted from Frostmourne dyed half of the Long Song forest a deathly pale white. Darkan's dark green eyes reflected the black lines that hung down from the ceiling. It was a characteristic of those who practice dark magic, but he usually used magic tools to conceal it well. That's right, the strongest fortress was the easiest to break through from the inside. No one would have thought that Darkan Delethil, the guardian of the magic formation and a member of the Silvermoon Council, was actually a degenerate who worshipped dark magic and pursued eternal life. Most importantly, he was not a follower of the Church of the Damned. It was a pleasant surprise that the Lich King Nazul had unintentionally discovered when he scanned Xueqi Salas with his divine will. Both parties hit it off immediately. As a member of the Silvermoon Council, Darkan's path to promotion had been blocked. He could not advance to Breaking Dawn, nor could he seize the throne of the king. Facing the end of his life step by step, he was unwilling and indignant. That stubbornness and endless thirst for power drove him step by step into depravity. The most prosperous countries were often the easiest to breed the darkest depravity. Darkan was undoubtedly one of the best of the best. This wide-area defensive magic formation that Xueqi Salas had spent countless resources, manpower, and resources to create could not be completely handed over to Darkan. However, the Sun King and the Silvermoon Council did not expect that the key to the other magic formation was in the hands of the resourceful Ranger General, Theron. Both Theron and Darkan, as well as the elf knight Riadaline who had sought refuge with Xueqi, were close friends. Darkan easily swindled the magic key to enter the core of the magic formation. The source of mana for the magic formation in the Long Song forest naturally came from the mana vein that extended from the Sun Well. Darkan used the knowledge that the Lich King had taught him to easily reverse everything. Not only did he open the magic array, but he also used the magic power supplied to the magic array to create a portal that was almost as large as the Dark Portal, allowing the million elites of the Scourge army to travel more than 2,000 kilometers and appear in the core area of the Long Song forest. Seeing Arthas walk up to him with his head held high, receiving praise from the leader of the Death Knights, Darkan trembled in excitement. "Thank you, Your Majesty Lich King, for your appreciation. Thank you, Lord Arthas, for your praise. You won't be left out. Come, use your hand to hold the edge of Frostmourne." Arthas suddenly thrust the Ice Demon's sword in her hand into the ground. Anyone could easily sense that a wave of extreme coldness was extending endlessly through the ground. The trembling Darkan hesitated for a moment, but he immediately realized that he had betrayed the High Elves. There was no other way out for him. He clenched his teeth and gripped the edge of the magic sword tightly. Unexpectedly, his finger that touched the edge of the sword was not cut off. Instead, the coldness that gushed out from the magic sword took away his life. Darkan was dead. However, death was not the end. A lich dressed in blue and white magic robes suddenly appeared behind him. If there were any familiar faces, they would be able to recognize him from his pale face that he was the former Breaking Dawn archwizard Antonidas, who had turned from the most powerful human to the most powerful undying lich. Old Anthony stretched out his bony palm and placed it on the thin layer of ice on Darkan's back. There was no feeling of touching something hard. Instead, Antonidas' palm passed through the layer of ice as if it was soaked in water, pressing against Darkan's back. Magic circuit. Reconstruct. Expand. This is a good material. In a few short breaths, the Breaking Dawn lich retracted his palm, and the ice on Darkan's body suddenly exploded. Ha ha ha. Is this the power of death? Is this the power of immortality? Ha ha ha. How sweet. How intoxicated I am. Darkan came back to life, as an undying. The last trace of blood on his body had just faded, and the elements dancing in his palm had all turned into black dark force. How is it? Arthas asked. Willingly transformed into a lich is at least 30% stronger than an ordinary one, Antonidas replied. Very good. The fallen prince laughed. At this moment, Dalkin suddenly discovered that Earthies had yet to draw out Frostmourne. Beneath their feet, the initial undulation had turned into a huge vibration akin to surfing waves. Earthies had arrived. Bottom. Damn. Already. What? Really? This was a demon who had killed his father and master, and sent millions of people from his homeland and the entire continent to hell. The smile on his face turned into a sinister grin. I've always found the High Elves annoying since I was young. Back then, I thought that even though my father said that the Meinthal royal family's bloodline was the noblest in the world, how could there be a creature more noble than me? That's why I really wanted to see the expressions on the faces of those arrogant fellows when the turtle shell protecting the elves was smashed. If anyone could see through the thick soil to the ground, they would discover that the magic flowing in the veins of magic that extended from Sunchaser Island to Silvery Moon City, and then from Silvery Moon City to Longsong Forest, was rapidly changing from a scorching hot flow to a bone-chilling cold. Antonidas used a magic formation to quickly reverse the direction of this incomparably huge flow of magic. Under Earthisa's sword, the magic changed and rushed 180 degrees in the direction of Silvery Moon City. Ha ha ha! All of you arrogant long ears can go to hell. Then, I want all of you to crawl under my feet. Fire! Ice! Two completely different types of magic collided underground. At that moment, the soil of the entire Longsong Forest seemed to glow with a burst of magic. From the center of the Longsong Forest, from south to north, a forest that was 5 kilometers wide, densely packed with magic runes, one yellow and one white, appeared. On the ground of the entire forest, the light that seeped out of the ground flickered continuously. If one looked down from above, they would discover that there was a magic network that looked like tree roots coming out of the ground of the forest. Leave the place where the light is. Sylvanas only had time to shout this. Unfortunately, how many people could escape in such a short time? The south passed through the eastern temple and reached the outside of the forest, while the north passed through all of Silvery Moon City. An incomparably huge light screen that seeped out of the ground and reached the horizon divided the entire Elven Kingdom into two. As if there was a delay, an incomparably terrifying explosion occurred. Chapter 785. An earth-shattering shockwave swept through the entire kingdom, all the way to Silver Moon City. In that moment, every elf in the kingdom felt 1,000,000 times more terrifying than an earthquake. It was a sense of despair, as if the entire world was about to be destroyed in an instant. Starting from the Longsong Forest, the 100-meter-tall giant trees along the magical power vein were blown into the sky by the continuous explosions like dominoes. In the forest, Sylvanas tried to use her speed to dodge the shockwave of the terrifying explosion. She wasn't in the direct range of the explosion, but the speed of a hero was useless against the shockwave that surpassed the limits of the human body. With a muffled grunt, she was blasted into a tree by the shockwave. Sylvanas tried to activate a skill in mid-air to prevent herself from crashing into the tree, but before she could, the tree itself was sent flying. The elves within range of the explosion were turned to ash, and the soldiers outside were also thrown into confusion. The elves' slender bodies were the least resistant to shockwaves, and the shockwave from afar was enough to knock them off their feet. Many were even blown off the ground, crashing into various corners of the forest. The chocobo's feathers danced in the air, and the terrified or dying cries of the chocobos reverberated everywhere. Hadgeron Brightwing was closer to the center of the shockwave, and was blown into the sky by the shockwave. Theron was even more unlucky. She was hit by an exploding magic runestone, and half of her body was paralyzed as she was pinned under an arcane puppet. Lorthamar thought she was dead for sure, but a valiant figure appeared in front of her. A bolt of lightning flashed in her hand, and the arcane puppet that had been destroyed and lost its mobility suddenly bent its arm like a dying man's muscle spasms. In the instant that the puppet bounced up 30 centimeters, Sylvanas had already dug Theron out at a speed that was almost too fast for the naked eye to catch. The next moment, Sylvanas raised her hand, and a gust of wind swept out from her palm, pushing Hadgeron, who was about to fall to his death, away from the tremendous momentum of falling from the sky. He avoided crashing directly into the hard ground, and instead fell into the soft grass in the distance. Hadgeron was in a sorry state. He even had mud in his mouth. However, he knew very well that he was a ranger, not a mage with the slow fall spell. It was all thanks to Sylvanas that he didn't end up as a giant meat pie. However, most of the other rangers were not so lucky to have a heroic ranger general to save the day. Some were pierced by sharp branches, some were thrown dozens of meters away, and then fell heavily into meat paste. Some were affected by the explosion, their bodies were cut off in mid-air, and they became corpses before falling to the ground. The pitiful state of their subordinates made Hadgeron and Lord Themar even more aware of how dangerous the situation was. Hadgeron spat out the mud in his mouth. "Big sister, I owe you my life." Lord Themar was even more direct. He seemed to have figured out what was going on, and his face turned green and red. "If I don't die today, my life is yours in the future." Servanas narrowed his eyes and scanned Lord Themar at high speed. Lord Themar sat up with difficulty. Gritting his teeth, he slapped his dislocated calf back into place. "I only have half of my strength left." Hadgeron quickly checked his equipment and gritted his teeth. "Big sister, you can use my life first when it's critical." Servanas pursed his pretty lips and glanced at the rangers who were still able to move. "Sound the horn. Gather all the elves who can still move. We're going back." Hopefully, they could make it in time. The Long Song forest, which had been lush and lush a moment ago, now looked as if it had been plowed by a huge iron plow. The black soil under the forest was scattered in all directions in the huge explosion. In the blink of an eye, a huge, deep scar was formed in the forest. Endless chaotic magic spilled out from the huge black scar. The rangers could not imagine what Silver Moon City was like on the other side of the magical ley line. The whole of Silver Moon City was shrouded in smoke at this moment. The explosion of the magical ley line destroyed more than half of the city. The street from the city gate to the Sunstrider Palace was completely destroyed. Not a single building that was more than 1 floor tall could be seen. Almost every wall turned into powder and fell to the ground. The sound of magic items exploding could be heard continuously. Every street struggled in the flames. The originally flat ground of the entire city was like waves, piling up and squeezing together. Screams came from afar and spread endlessly. Perhaps the more powerful wizards could instantly activate their magic shields to save their lives, but the soldiers and civilians without special abilities were completely at their wits' end. Anastrian, the Sun King, and several members of the Silver Moon Council rushed out. They saw that Silver Moon City, which had been incomparably beautiful just a minute ago, had already been reduced to ruins. There were shocking collapsed ruins everywhere. It was as if a terrible earthquake had happened. "By the Well of the Sun, what happened?" The Sun King had just finished talking to himself. Screams suddenly came from where the city gate should have been, as well as the vague light of destructive magic. Was that a battle? Ah! The screams could be heard clearly even from a few kilometers away, because the screams were getting louder and louder. Anastrian was not someone who had never experienced war, but was a fool who had been numbed by peace. He immediately realized that this was definitely a premeditated attack. The increasing dark aura in the direction of the city gate told him the identity of the attacker, the Doomsday Army. They had no intention of saving the victims in the city. The Sun King's expression turned cold. "Guards! Gather everyone who can fight and set up a defense line in the palace." He ordered his subordinates to set up a defense, but the Sun King didn't enter the palace himself. Instead, he walked out of the palace, surrounded by guards. A Silver Moon Council member asked in shock, "Your Majesty, where are you going?" The Well of the Sun, the hearts of the council members thumped. They realized His Majesty's choice. In the eyes of the king, only the Well of the Sun was the root of the High Elves. He had already abandoned the 100,000 to 80,000 elves who were still alive in Silver Moon City. A council member couldn't help but dissuade the Sun King. "Your Majesty, are you going to abandon your subjects just like that?" Before Anastrian could finish, something even more shocking to him, as well as all the council members and guards, happened. A bridge made of ice suddenly extended from the direction of the city gate to everyone in a few breaths. Before anyone could react, a huge ice disk carrying a few figures that emitted an ominous aura had already arrived. Chapter 786. Huel Salas's self-isolation was for political and military reasons. In fact, the High Elves were everywhere in the Eastern Kingdom in terms of life, economy, and so on. Didn't they see that King Dalen's lover was an elf? Not joining the alliance to fight against the Calamity Army didn't mean that Anastrian didn't know what was going on outside. Even if he knew, his heart still couldn't help but skip a beat when he saw the standard dead face of his old friend Antonidas. There were sounds of moaning and crying, the crackling sounds of fire burning the city, the loud sounds of explosions, and the increasingly loud sounds of killing coming from the original direction of the city gate. The Sun King didn't pay attention to all these sounds. All his attention was on Antonidas, who had become a lich, and the Death Knight beside him who held a skeleton-shaped magic sword. Along with the evil aura that was so thick that it could not be dispersed was the cloudless frost that quickly covered the entire sky above Silvermoon City, blocking out the sun and destroying the summer. 3 seconds later, a voice came from the sky above the Xueqi Palace. Anastrian. The voice was clear, dignified, and carried an inhuman coldness. It seemed to show its owner's indifference and cruelty towards life. The Sun King squinted his eyes that had crow's feet at the corners. His face scrunched up, and he snorted coldly without showing any weakness. Humph. Arthas? Unless the king was as outstanding as Thoradin the Great, humans with short lifespans wouldn't attract the Sun King's attention, no matter if they were high and mighty kings or lowly peasants. But Arthas was different. Apart from his notorious patricide and master-killing, he also represented another meaning: eternity. Even though he was a dead person, his strength made up for his appearance. There was a flash of jealousy in Anastrian's eyes, and Antonidas caught on to his negative emotions. As the most evil magic weapon and a magic sword that could seduce people, Frostmourne wouldn't let go of this point. The whisper from the demon sword caused Arthas's lips to curl into a strange smile. Sun King stabbed his gorgeous and dazzling golden staff into the stone bricks of the palace and sneered. "You guys are not bad. Darkan. You're not bad either." The Sun King merely glanced at Darkan, the great traitor, before withdrawing his gaze. "If you're here to kill me and snatch the Well of the Sun," he bellowed in a deep voice, "bring it on." "Kill you? Snatch the Sun Well? When have I ever said such a thing?" Arthas chuckled softly. Then, a fanatical look appeared on his face. "No. I'm here on behalf of the Lich King to grant you eternity. As long as you are willing to become a lich, you will be able to exist in this world forever and rule over your subjects forever. Furthermore, you will be even more powerful. Strong. Big." It was almost as if they were responding to Arthas's declaration. At some point in time, the Death Knights had already passed through the ruins of Silverymoon and arrived in front of the palace. They dismounted from their skeletal warhorses and knelt on one knee, placing their left hands on their chests to show their utmost respect to the owner of the declaration. The great Lich Antonidas took a step forward and smiled as well. "Old friend, look at how weak you are. Just like how I was a few months ago. Time destroyed our bodies, causing our magic to deteriorate day by day. But now I'm different." Different? After sensing the Sun Well magical power veins that were still flowing under the palace, the Sun King raised his head in disdain and declared confidently, "This is Silvermoon City, my home ground. No existence can defeat me here. Antonidas, you tied with me before purely because we were in a neutral area." "Home ground?" Antonidas smiled mysteriously. "This is not just your home ground." The next moment, Anastrian understood what his old opponent meant. Death, terror, anguish, fear. All the negative effects that living beings could have became the source of the Great Lich's magic power. This was the cataclysm. This was evil. Furthermore, as the Calamity Army continued to teleport into the forest, massacring and spreading fear in Silverymoon, Antonidas's power would only increase. It was obvious that this was enough to make up for the gap between him and the Great Lich. What made the Sun King most uneasy was that the Calamity Army had occupied one of the 3 magical power of the Well of the Sun as a source of magic to supply the portal. As time passed, the number of undyings that appeared in the land of Xueqi would only increase. But Anastrian was not willing to give up. He had been crowned king for more than 3,000 years. How could he be willing to be the servant of a monster of death that came out of nowhere? "Humph! No one can defeat me here," the Sun King roared loudly. Then, the staff in his hand released a dazzling divine light that was even brighter than the sun. "We are not humans." Antonidas sneered and raised his staff high. "Teach him a lesson." Arthas was unmoved. She stood quietly with her sword. A second later, the violent magic that surged out of the elemental realm, enough to change the color of the entire world, was shaped into a completely different nature and form. It collided in midair. On the other side, with Servanas as the leader, an elite elven troop was charging forward. The composition of this troop was very complicated. There were rangers, warriors, spellbreakers, paladins, and many arcane puppets that were originally set up at the front line. Because the attack was too fierce, many people only realized that they had been left behind by the troops after they had dealt with the enemies in front of them. The injured were left behind. Those who could not catch up were left behind. Those who were trapped were also left behind. But none of the elves had any complaints, because they were protecting the king. They were risking their lives to rush back to save their capital, their homeland. At this moment, Sylvanas did not look like a ranger at all. Instead, she looked more like a goddess of war. With a longbow in hand, she was always at the front of the assault troop, showing off her strong and heroic posture to the elves behind her. The sound of the longbow never stopped. When her left hand was tired, she would switch to her right hand. When her right hand was numb, she would switch to her left hand. Every arrow that carried wind and thunder would definitely blow up the head of the most difficult Undyings. Perhaps a lich with powerful magic power could ignore the Undyings' defense arrows and break the Undyings' magic shields, using the power of thunder to destroy the Undying souls. Chapter 787. Or perhaps it was the Death Knights who were skilled in martial arts and good at using dark magic to repair their damaged bodies. The arrows that were as swift as meteors could always find the vital points of the Death Knights. Then there were the lesser lords of the cave demons. Those former spider demons, even if they hid underground, would be blasted into pieces by the huge lightning unless they hid very deep. Sylvanas was like a flag that encouraged all the elves. There were many elves who had fallen behind, but similarly, there were also elves who were trapped in various places and could not break out of the encirclement. They followed Sylvanas without hesitation. To the north. To the north. All the way to the north. Destroy those filthy undead and demons. Kill, kill, kill. Kill to Silvery Moon City. Kill until they see their loved ones, until they see their king. Silver Moon City's magnificent platinum and gold city gate had disappeared without a trace. There were gravel everywhere. There were bloodstains everywhere. Death was everywhere. However, this was not important. The belief of protecting the country supported them. Sylvanas, the ranger hero who had returned from the distant southern continent, was leading them. As the number of undead increased, the advancement of the army became slower and slower. At the same time, it was an opportunity for the elves behind to catch up. Coupled with the elves who rushed over from the east and west of the city, the army became larger and larger. Quantitative change eventually led to qualitative change. When the number of people in the army exceeded 10,000, the undead army near the city gate finally could not hold on any longer. Charge! For Quell Dorii. For Quell Salus. With a thunderous sound, Prince Kale, who was patrolling in the eastern part of the kingdom, arrived. He used 18 consecutive flame blasts to blast a path of destruction among the undead in one breath. As the fire elements were drawn away by the prince, the path to the palace was completely opened. However, the next scene made the hearts of the elves in the army palpitate. After breaking through the undead army near the city gate, they did not see any survivors or corpses along the way. This gave all the elves an ominous premonition. No one said anything. Under the leadership of Sylvanas and Kale, everyone used all their strength to rush towards the sun-chasing king's court. Red pillars. Golden spires. Snow-white ground. The gorgeous and dazzling palace was as clean, solemn, and beautiful as it was yesterday. Compared to the ruins of the collapsed buildings outside, it was like the difference between hell and heaven. Kale wanted to heave a sigh of relief, but just as he was about to step onto the stairs of the palace, he was blocked by Sylvanas. Where are the royal guards? Sylvanas's reminder made Kale, shiver. That's right. That's right. In the past, on every step of the stairs outside the palace, there would be 2 spellbreaker guards of the Wong family, who held a red shield that was almost oval in shape and a double-edged sword. Now, not a single guard could be seen. Could it be? The uneasiness in the hearts of all the elves quickly spread. Just as Kale, could not hold it in any longer and was about to rush in with his subordinates, the doors of the palace suddenly opened. There was no light in the huge door. Because the sky was covered by the canopy of undead, and the entire city was filled with a faint, icy mist, no matter how good the rangers' eyesight was, they couldn't see what was happening in the palace. They could only see a figure dressed in luxurious clothes walking out of the palace. After spending 1,000 years together, it was impossible for him to mistake that silhouette and that attire. Father? Kale, that was overjoyed as he broke free from Savannah's obstruction and rushed forward, running up 7 steps in one go. In the next instant, the prince's body suddenly stiffened as if he had been hit by a petrifying spell. The prince was right. The person who appeared at the main entrance of the palace was the king of Xueqi, the great Anastrian Sunstrider. But this was the Sun King who appeared in front of the army as an undead. Even as a high elf with a lifespan of thousands of years, Anastrian was already very old. There were age spots and a large number of wrinkles on his face that could not be hidden. His arms and fingers were thin, and his body was a little hunched. At this moment, other than his hunched body standing straight again, there was his deathly gray skin color and his green eyes that carried the light of the netherworld. No! Impossible! With father's strength, how could it be so easy? Kale that's voice trembled, and his outstretched left hand trembled like a sieve. After the living were killed by the Scourge army, they would turn into evil magic and transform into undead. Everyone knew this. However, Kale that's did not believe that his father, who had the support of the magical ley line of the sun well, would be so easily killed and transformed into a lich. Kale that's was not the only one who was horrified. In the square in front of the palace, every elf who witnessed this scene was shocked out of their wits. At this moment, they completely lost the ability to think. Every elf looked at their king, who had stepped into the realm of undead, with blank eyes. 3,000 years. Anastrian had ruled the High Elf Kingdom for a full 3,000 years. For humans in the world of Azeroth, whose average lifespan was only about 30 years, this was already a matter of 100 lifetimes. It had been such a long time that the fact that Anastrian was the king was imprinted in the deepest part of every elf's soul. This seemed to be the most important part of the world. However, their king was not only dead. He was also turned into an undead. This was not only bad news, but also a double collapse of the soul and faith. Prince Kale that's mouth squirmed for a long time before he squeezed out this sentence. Father. Why? Did you lose? Lost. Anastrian's facial muscles relied purely on dark power to maintain the so-called liveliness. At this moment, he revealed a resentful expression. Lost. I didn't lose to that bastard Antonidas. I lost to myself. I lost to time. He had lost to this old body. If not for my old age, I could have drawn a large amount of power from the sun well endlessly and destroyed any invader. How could I be suppressed by a mere Frostmourne? Suppressed. The moment the former Sun King's voice fell, every knowledgeable elf in the square imagined such a scene. The Sun King resisted and struggled. If he was 1,000 years younger and was a Breaking Dawn mage, of course, he could ignore the bottleneck and wantonly draw the magic power from the sun well to destroy all invading enemies. It was a pity that he was too old. Whether it was the total amount of magic power or the amount of magic power output per unit of time, both had declined greatly. So he lost. However, this was not the end of everything. Chapter 788. The Sun King's declaration continued. He suddenly raised his arms high, and terrifying dark magic surged out of his body, enough to cover the sky and destroy all living beings in Silvery Moon. Just the dense aura of dark magic that could choke people to death was enough to make all the mages tremble in fear. Anastrian's magic had recovered. Not only had he recovered to his peak state when he was young, he was even stronger than that. That was almost a demigod, the strongest state at the peak of Breaking Dawn. The Sun King's aged and imposing voice echoed in the air above the square. No, not only that, his voice and image were also broadcasted to every place and quelled the loss that had a magic mirror through amplification magic, projection magic, and Silvermoon City's own magic broadcasting system. I have to admit that His Majesty the Lich King is more powerful. He is more suitable to be the master of this world. For greater power for immortality. I, the Sun King, Anastrian Sunstrider, swear allegiance to His Majesty the Lich King and become his general, on par with Arthas Menethil. As soon as these words were said, the world was shocked. Surrendered. The arrogant Sun King had actually surrendered. If the Sun King died in battle, no matter how unreliable his reign was in his later years, the elves would still respect and worship him. A king who died to protect his country and his people was definitely worthy of the people's worship. His bravery would even cause the loyalty of the elves to shift to his successor, Kale, that's. This was the case in the original history. When Kale, that's left Xueqi to find a new path for the remaining elves, Theron, as the regent, did his best to rebuild his homeland. It was only when Kale, that's completely fell and betrayed the High Elves that Theron had no choice but to set up another faction. Now there was a serious deviation in history. Antonidas, who had died and could only wander the Dalajan ruins, had become a great lich. Now, even the Sun King Anastrian had become a great lich. If Kel Thuzad, who was about to be resurrected, then Arthas would have 3 powerful great liches under her command. At this moment, no one knew that a third great lich would appear. Just the fact that the Alliance's 2 Breaking Dawn great wizards had fallen into depravity and become great liches was enough to shock every elf to the point of despair. A Breaking Dawn Archmage. That was the supreme combat power of the mortal world. How could he fall just like that? No, father, it shouldn't be like this, it shouldn't be like this. On the other side, Kale, was already sobbing uncontrollably as he knelt on the stairs. He couldn't accept the fact that his father had become like this. The High Elves loved magic and pursued strength in the mysterious field, but they also loved life. This was why Quell the Lost was able to nurture thousands of rangers who loved the forest in the Long Song Forest. His father did not succumb to the torment of his soul after he died in battle. Instead, he voluntarily became a great lich. This fact, Kale couldn't accept it. The Sun King sighed. My child, you don't understand the beauty of eternal life, and you can't understand the fear of old people like us who wake up every day feeling like our lives are counting down. If it weren't for Antonidas as an example, I wouldn't have made up my mind to take this step. In a sense, this was the chain effect of Antonidas' fall. His old enemy had fallen from grace and become even stronger, suppressing him. This was something that the competitive Anastrian could not accept. Similarly, this was the dark side of every old man who was afraid of death. However, Anastrian didn't know that after Arthas and Frostmourne realized this, Frostmourne had been using soul whispers to tempt him during the battle just now. No matter what, Frostmourne had succeeded. The Sun King continued to persuade him. My child, think about it. Why can the despicable night elves, who exiled us, have eternal life, while we can only suffer from old age and death? Why do we have to accept the weakening of our power and the restriction of using magic? In the past, there was no way, but now we can have a better future. Following his words, nearly 10 figures in magic robes appeared beside the Sun King. Kale Lore and Hadgeron covered their mouths in disbelief. They couldn't imagine that more than 80% of the Silver Moon counselors had chosen to fall like the Sun King. Yes, they were all very old. Perhaps with the lifespan of the High Elves, they still had 100 years to live. This was a long time for humans, but it was the end for the elves. The temptation of immortality was hard to resist. Come, my child, Kale, become one of the undead with me. Let us, father and son, rule Quell the Lost forever and become eternal kings. And all of you will become an indestructible part of the undead kingdom. After persuading his son, the Sun King continued to announce the fate of the other soldiers. No, I don't want to die. Sorry, Death. I can't accept it. The army hesitated. Even though this was an order from their king, the elves were still seriously shaken. If it were any other order, even if it required them to sacrifice themselves, they might gladly accept it. But who could accept becoming such an ugly monster after death? Especially the elves who loved beauty as much as their lives. The hesitation soon turned into a commotion. The crowd became agitated. The next second, the situation changed again. A wall of death flames that was 50 meters high, emitting a dark aura, soared into the sky and tightly surrounded the entire square in front of the palace, including the tens of thousands of elves. This was the work of the Sun King. A former Silver Moon counselor walked out and sneered. Lowly subjects. This is not a request from your king, but an order from your king. You can choose not to accept it and be killed, but in the end, you will still become immortals. Or you can voluntarily become immortals. If it's the latter, you can obtain more power than you had when you were alive. Hiss. All the elves gasped. At this moment, as if to demonstrate, a row of Silver Moon counselors released their dark magic power. Suddenly, a black aura soared into the sky, suppressing all the voices of dissent. Be killed. Become weak. Or voluntarily die. Become stronger. If it was death anyway, then there should be no need to consider what choice to make, right? The voice of the Sun King sounded again. Is there anyone else who objects? If not, my child, you will be the first to set an example for everyone. Chapter 789. The Sun King's words forced Kale, that's into a dead end. Which elf in their right mind would commit suicide to become a lich? Putting aside the eternal life that the world tree brought to the night elves, just the lifespan of the high elves was extremely long. It was not a problem for them to live for thousands of years. The world of Azeroth was very kind to the elves. They could maintain their youthful appearance for 90% of their lives. From 100 years of age to decades before their death, they would generally maintain the appearance of handsome men and beautiful women. Most elves loved beauty. Other than Darkan, who was a fanatic of dark magic, no one was willing to die and become like that. Of course, it was another matter if they were caught by a Breaking Dawn mage and forced to die. Although they did not want to admit it, there seemed to be clear evidence that a dead Breaking Dawn mage would become stronger. Should they be killed first, become weak, and then be enslaved? Or should they throw themselves into the embrace of darkness? If death was the prerequisite, there was almost no need to consider this choice. Unfortunately, no one wanted to die, especially under such circumstances. Unknowingly, Prince Kale, that's had become the focus of the tens of thousands of elites present. Kale, that was the focus of countless sword-like gazes. That feeling was worse than being cut by 1,000 knives. He could clearly hear the thoughts of the elves behind him. We don't want to sacrifice our beauty for power. Lead us to rebel against your father. Kale, that's since your father is dead, regardless of whether he still exists or not, you are already our king. Why should the living listen to the orders of a dead man? Those who were able to risk their lives to fight their way back to protect the emperor under the shroud of evil forces were naturally not weak. It was no exaggeration to say that the people gathered here were the most elite warriors of Xueqi Salas. They did not lack courage, strength, or loyalty to the kingdom. What they lacked was a flag to fight against evil. Obviously, they wanted Kale, that's to be this flag. Kale, that was gentle, sincere, powerful, and had a perfect image. He was the role model of the entire Xueqi Salas. At this moment, he was also the hope of the elves. Even though they knew that they were no match for him, the hearts of the elves were still in their throats, eager to hear the declaration of resistance from the mouth of their beloved prince. No. Even if it was just a shout filled with resistance. They would not hesitate to fight the Sun King who had fallen into evil. A Nastrian, who attempted to drag the entire race into the abyss of death in order to not die, did not deserve to be their king. But, they were doomed to be disappointed. Kale that's mouth squirmed. From the trembling of his robe, one could imagine how much his body was trembling under the robe. Your Majesty, you? Theron suddenly shouted. He hoped to wake Kale that's up. The dead were already dead. Dead men do not deserve royal power. As long as Kale, that's the righteous prince, raised his arm and called himself king, he would definitely gain the recognition of all the soldiers. That's right. At this moment, Kale, that was already a king in the truest sense of the word. He only needed to take a small step forward. No one expected Kale, that's to actually slowly kneel down. It was obedience to his father, obedience to the former king. Whether it was sincere or forced, he knelt down. Almost every living high elf felt a burning shame. It was the most ruthless kind of humiliation, as if they were being mercilessly whipped in the face. The prince that they had high hopes for was actually such a coward. Your Highness, I was wrong about you. Hageron Brightwing, who was not far from Kale that's, roared. But a more powerful female voice interrupted him. It was Theron's voice. You still call him your Highness. He doesn't even have the most basic respect for the living. He is not worthy of being our king. In the next instant, two huge hands of magic power appeared out of thin air and sent the two ranger generals flying. Then, they were pressed to the ground by the huge hands of magic power. Under the power of the mysterious magic, they could only let out muffled groans and could not utter a single word. The Sun King's voice sounded again. Come to me, my child. As a ruler, you must have the strength and dignity of a ruler. You don't have to care about their opinions. No one will oppose us. Because they will soon crawl in front of us as undead. They will be our subjects for all eternity. The voice itself had a strong magic power that completely surpassed the radiant moon level. It was so huge and terrifying that no one dared to resist. Kale, that Sunstrider, Surrendered. Perhaps some people would wonder why this Kaisi surrendered so easily. In history, after the fall of his country, he first sought refuge with the Alliance, then was put on death row by Vashj. Then, he was rescued by Vashj, poached by Illidan, but did not do well. In the end, he sought refuge with the most unreliable boss, killed Jaden, and fell. Someone had once discovered that such a large adult elephant was actually chained by a small iron chain tied to a small iron nail. This was because when the elephant was young, no matter how hard it struggled, it could not break free from the small iron chain. After failing day after day, the shadow of failure had been deeply rooted in its mind, forming a habit, and becoming a part of its life. I can't resist this iron chain. Think about it from another perspective. In the human world, being a crown prince for 20 years was already extremely difficult. But because of the long lifespan of the High Elves, being a crown prince for 1,000 years was not a problem at all. More than 1,000 years of accumulated power. More than 1,000 years of taming. Even if he had always resisted, he had never been able to surpass his father. Just this alone would plant an indelible seed of failure in Kale, that's heart. If Kale, that's was bold enough, he would have long ago overturned the Silver Moon Council and revived the royal power. If Kale, that's was vicious enough, he would have long ago secretly poisoned his father to inherit the throne. If, there were many possibilities in this world, but there was only one result. Kale, that's, who was raised in this semi-greenhouse environment, seriously lacked courage and decisiveness. That was why there was Kale, that's, who always placed his hopes on the strong. That was why there was this timid prince who would obey even if he was asked to die. Time seemed to stop. The air seemed to freeze. All of the surviving elves had expressions of extreme horror and fury on their faces. They knew that the following death would be terrifying and miserable. But no one dared to stand up and fight against the incomparably terrifying undead king. Who else? Were there no more heroes among the High Elves who dared to stand up and fight against such a terrifying tyrant? At this moment, when every elf yearned for a hero and a leader, a female voice sounded. I object. Chapter 790. Savannah stood at the front of the team, her light blonde hair fluttering in the wind. Her long light blonde hair had been her symbol for the past 1,000 years. At this moment, in front of these 10,000 elite elves, her light blonde hair was a symbol that was beginning to be deified. Savannah's eyes were brighter than when she had been a ranger general. They were more confident and determined, like emeralds shining under the sun. Her long eyebrows, which were unique to elves, were full of heroism and stubbornness. There was no longer the confusion, weakness, and hesitation in her eyes when she was forced to become a paycheck thief under the suppression of the Silver Moon Council more than 10 years ago. There was also no longer the deep, helpless fatigue that was left in the memories of the Rangers. She was wearing a Ranger's outfit. But this Ranger's outfit was completely different from the traditional Ranger's outfit. It was full of her personal characteristics. A dark green cloak fluttered in the cold, turbid wind, accompanied by the fluttering golden hair. Her 2 pauldrons were studded with the fangs of trolls hunted in Stranglethorn Vale, giving her a wild demeanor similar to that of a tribe. It was to commemorate the hatred of the High Elves, and also the glory of her continuous hunting of trolls in the past 10 years. It was the symbol of the king of the forest. Other than the bikini breastplate engraved with lightning runes, her exquisite collarbones and sexy waist were the only things on her body. The dark green breeches that were very suitable for concealment were obviously magic items. But if one looked closely, one would find that there was electricity lingering on them. The Ranger General. No, after Kale, that had surrendered and the 2 appointed Ranger Generals, Lord Themar and Hadgeron, had been suppressed, there was no doubt that Savannah's had become the last hope of these 10,000 elves. She stood ramrod straight. It was like a rising flag. Although everyone could see that she was always at the forefront during the charge, when everyone was covered in dust and even covered in wounds, her sword, longbow, armor, and accessories were all new and clean. Even her long ranger boots were not stained with dust. She was like a proud commander about to attend a military parade, maintaining the perfect appearance that the High Elves wanted to see the most. Normally, even walking through a burning street would cause one to be stained by the ashes of the city. Not to mention, he was able to maintain such a heroic posture after killing over 1,000 undead creatures, both strong and weak. This was not only due to the power of wind and lightning surrounding her, but also the pinnacle of her combat skills. Suddenly, The elves couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. After 1,000 years of intermittent battles with the trolls at the edge of the Longsong Forest, and the baptism of the Second Battle of the Dark Portal, which was the largest in the history of the Eastern Kingdom, the once talented but inexperienced female ranger seemed to be following the footsteps of history, and rapidly grew on the path of a queen. A ranger hero and a forgotten queen. Two completely different and unrelated figures seemed to cross the boundary of history at this moment, gradually overlapping and merging into one. The Sun King Anastrian and the Ranger General Servanas. One was at the bottom of the stairs in front of the palace, while the other was high up in the middle of the palace. A king who used to be high and mighty. An exile who had been abandoned by the kingdom. However, their gazes crossed the length of the stairs and met each other in mid-air. Anastrian ignored Kale, who was kneeling on the stairs and trembling slightly. He lowered his head and used his turbid eyes to look at the rebel who messed up his grand plan to force him to surrender. The Sun King sneered, his words filled with thick sarcasm and disdain. You object? What right do you have to object? It's rare for you to muster up the courage to object to me, but you still can't stop the lives of you and your possible followers from coming to an end. So what's the point of your objection? Servanas raised her head high, her beautiful fearless face glowing with the light of life. I object. It's because I'm a ranger, and I at least know how to be grateful for the beauty of life. Unlike a guy like you whose brain is rotten, who only treats life as a tool to be trampled on and discarded at will. The Sun King sneered. Grateful for life? What's the point of such a boring feeling? As long as one is a living creature, one must always have the fear of death. Since one can't abandon the fear of death, then one should find a way to overcome death itself. My foolish subjects. Since you believe that death is terrible and miserable, and you don't dare to take the step yourself, then you should abandon your rationality and let me, as your king, decide everything for you. Servanas said sarcastically. Let you decide? Do you think you who have become so ugly, still have the right to decide to make us as ugly as you? Enough. Anastrian, you know that your life is gone, but can you please not continue to exist shamelessly? Don't even try to drag more people to die with you, knowing that you and your followers will not have any redemption in the future. The Sun King was clearly angered by Servanas' rebellious declaration. You! Sylvanas glanced at Kale, who was still trembling but did not dare to look at her. After sighing softly, she slowly raised the longbow in her hand, drew the bow, and nocked an arrow. She pointed the sharp arrowhead at the high and mighty Sun King, pointing at the once incomparably noble head that had now turned gray and ugly. Anastrian, you have the right to give up your life, but you have no right to trample on the life and soul of every elf who loves life. With this sentence of yours, I, Servanas Windrunner, hereby declare that I don't recognize the Sunstrider as my king. So my last advice to you is, go to hell. Undying. Every word was sonorous and powerful. Bit by bit, it seeped into the soul. Every elf at this moment felt an incomparably burning sense of excitement gushing out from the deepest part of their soul, spreading to every corner of their bloodline, and igniting every cell in their body. The unsuppressible voice finally turned into a heaven-shaking roar. Thousands of elves shouted in unison, Go to hell! Filthy undying! The Sun King suddenly sighed softly. Fools are fools. You can only live more easily by giving up your life. In the next moment, a lightning-filled shadow was already less than an inch away from his eyes. Chapter 791. If Anastrian's eyes could still see, they would be filled with a deathly chill at this moment. No one could survive such an attack that seemed to transcend space. Even a Breaking Dawn mage would not be able to open a shield in time when his mind was distracted. This soundless explosive shot was definitely Servanas' pinnacle work. Unfortunately, Anastrian was no longer human. The fallen Sun King was definitely one of the few peerless powerhouses who stood at the peak of the undying realm. Unlike Antonidas, who had lost many of his magic circuits before his death and almost fell to the Radiant Moon rank, Anastrian had become an undying voluntarily. When the dark power guided by Frostmourne filled his body, his greatest weakness, aging, it was no longer his weakness. Without the bottleneck of using magic, Anastrian's current strength could be said to be at the peak of his personal peak. The arrow that contained lightning spun wildly in front of the Sun King's pupil at a speed of more than 100 revolutions per second. Not to mention a rotten eyeball, even if it was a city wall, Sylvanas was confident that he could drill a hole through it. Unfortunately, Anastrian, who was at the peak of mysterious power in this world, had a defense that was not limited to city walls. It was a close call, but the tens of thousands of high elves still heard this word, dark flame barrier. It was not a word that came out of the mouth, but more like it was forcefully stuffed into the minds of every elf through the soul. The dark aura instantly gathered on the Sun King's body, turning him into a black sun filled with an evil aura. High temperature, high heat, terrifying majesty and pressure. That was not an existence that mortals could look at directly. Sylvanas could not believe her eyes. With her extraordinary eyesight, she clearly saw a layer of black film appear on the retina in front of the Sun King's right pupil. It was as thin as a soap bubble. It gave her a feeling that it would burst with a poke. However, it was this seemingly unreliable and miniature black flame barrier that blocked Sylvanas's arrow that could be said to be the peak of sneak attacks. If Sylvanas had a high-powered microscope, she could have even discovered that the black flames already had a diamond-level molecular arrangement. TC. Sylvanas stomped her foot, and her valiant figure suddenly disappeared from where she stood. Almost at the same time, under her feet, a huge pillar of black flames that was as tall as 10 people and needed 3 people to wrap their arms around it suddenly rose up. Ah! The elves nearby screamed and retreated. It was obvious that he had missed the target. It was because in the next second, Sylvanas' figure already appeared 10 meters to the left. He drew his bow and knocked an arrow. The Valkyrie's vigorous figure seemed to move in an instant, appearing at every corner of the stairs to the royal court. Every time it appeared, it would disappear in a flash. Following that, numerous sharp arrows pierced through the air toward the Sun King. If it was any other opponent, they would have been hit by Sylvanas' arrows and become a human-shaped hedgehog. But that was a fallen Breaking Dawn archmage. Sylvanas had used no less than 7 types of arrows, but none of them could penetrate his indistinct black flame barrier. Anastrian's fire magic was still unhurriedly chasing after the female ranger's back. Moreover, the speed of the pursuit was getting faster and faster, not giving the female ranger any time to catch her breath. Yes. It was like an evil old cat that kept toying with a mouse after catching it, giving the mouse a chance to escape before catching it again, constantly making the mouse hover between hope and despair. In the beginning, the tens of thousands of elves still prayed for Sylvanas to show her might and destroy this king who had fallen into the abyss of evil. Because they couldn't even step over the black wall of flames in front of the stairs. Soon, they became deeply uneasy. The Sun King's mockery came at the right time. I don't want to admit it, but today, the entire high elf race and ancient traditions will be destroyed. Because absolute death has arrived here. It's not a mighty power that mortals can resist. Sylvanas' angry curses came from the air. So you even gave up the noble position that has been passed down for 1,000 years, and would rather become a dead dog to kneel and lick Arthas' boots? Anger without strength is just a meaningless struggle, the Sun King said disapprovingly. You can still speak to me so unyieldingly because you haven't experienced the absolute power of the Lich King, as well as the despair of invincibility. Despair? You're not worthy. Sylvanas' disdainful sneer echoed in the air. If there's a name in this world that brings me despair, that name would be Duke Marcus. Not you, Anastrian. His plan that transcends time and space isn't something a fool like you can understand. At the mention of Duque's name, not only Kale, who was still crawling on the stairs and didn't dare to move, but even Anastrian trembled violently. Sylvanas seemed to have found the Sunstrider father and son's sore spot, and mercilessly attacked with his poisonous tongue. Ha ha ha. You're right. Even your master Arthas' hand was cut off by Duque. And your master's master, Zul, was also defeated by Duque. Not to mention you, Anastrian. You're clearly an old dog that's afraid of death, so don't use greatness to cover up your fear of death and cowardice. When it came to arguing, the most important thing was the argument. Although Duque, who was at the peak of the Radiant Moon Realm, normally couldn't defeat a Breaking Dawn Great Wizard, everyone loved to hear this argument. I can kill your boss, I can kill your boss, I can kill you. Yes, there's nothing wrong with that. At this moment, over 10,000 elves cheered in unison. The Sun King's face darkened. His originally pale face was now like the bottom of a pot because of the power of darkness. Gritting his teeth, the Sun King said coldly, I once gave you enough opportunities to embrace the supreme power of darkness, but you stubbornly refused. Don't blame me then. You, Ranger General Sylvanas Windrunner, will be displayed in front of all elves as a warning to others for resisting stubbornly. As his voice fell, the Sun King's attack method immediately changed. Space was being divided. Of course, it wasn't that the Sun King's power had reached the point where it could cut through space. It was the wall of flames that was difficult for rangers to pass through, rapidly dividing the entire space. From the largest cube, which had a length, width and height of 500 meters, it rapidly shrunk, rapidly compressing the space that Sylvanas could move in. Chapter 792. Rangers were not mystics, and rangers did not have a strong life force or defense. In this situation, if she was a holy knight, she might be able to use invincibility to charge in and fight. But as a ranger, from the moment she could not shoot the enemy and refused to leave, Sylvanas' fate was decided. Like a poor bird in a cage, no matter how fast she flapped her wings, she could not break free from the shackles of the cage. Her space to move was getting smaller and smaller. Receive my strongest attack, the fallen king who tried to destroy his people and kingdom. Anar Alabalor, for the eternal sun. This was Sylvanas' most powerful arrow. It might be effective against other existences. The most powerful arrow often meant that she needed to stop moving and accumulate power. For a mage who had rich defense, control, and countermeasure methods, it was like sending herself to death. On the contrary, the sneak attack from before would be more effective. Sylvanas did not want to use this move until the last moment. Lightning gathered on her body, and the raging wind blew away the black flames that swept over. At this moment, Sylvanas had used all the elemental power she could. Seeing this, Anastrian's grey lips twitched. If I have to shoot this arrow to make you despair and serve me forever, then as you wish, my ranger general. Who wants to serve a rotten bone like you? Her light blonde hair danced in the raging wind, and Sylvanas almost pulled the longbow in her hand to a full moon. The atmosphere shook. The sky echoed with a buzzing sound. The power of this arrow was definitely not small. If it was a city gate without magic protection, perhaps it would be instantly shattered by this arrow. Thump! The vibration of the bowstring finally sounded. She released her fingers that were almost twisted by the bowstring, and as if it had turned into a twisting lightning arrow, it finally left the bowstring. After this arrow was shot, the entire arrow turned into a meteor in mid-air, shooting towards the Sun King with unparalleled power. But such an arrow only passed through the 3 layers of black flames between her and the Sun King, and was annihilated. It disappeared without a trace, as if it had never existed in this world. Just kill me, Sylvanas said through gritted teeth. A sneer appeared at the corner of the Sun King's lips. Huh! He didn't even bother to raise his staff. With a point of his skinny finger, an illusory black skeleton rushed towards her with a roar. Sylvanas let out a whimper. She never cried out of fear or regret. This brief, hoarse whimper was born of anger, hatred, and righteous rage, because she could not stop the evil king, who had become the fallen. Even if she sacrificed everything she had, even her life, she still wouldn't be able to stop it. She suddenly remembered the advice of Alugia and the others before she left. Wait for Xueqi. Xueqi will definitely have a way. If you don't have the strength to see through the whole situation, then please wait for Xueqi's instructions. Suddenly he felt sad. Sister Aurelia, Sister Sasha, was I wrong? In pain and despair, she faced the terrifying black skeleton head-on. She hoped that her magic items could slightly resist this dark magic, but they shattered the moment they touched the black skeleton. Low-level mysteries were defenseless in front of high-level mysteries. The black skeleton hit her. Cold. It was absolute cold that penetrated into her heart, like an ice sword cutting into her body. At this moment, Sylvanas saw Kale that's turn his head, and their eyes met. The blood drained from Sylvanas' face, and her mind began to blur. Was I hallucinating? A hint of regret appeared on Prince Kale, that's handsome face. Sylvanas' Windrunner felt that she was in free fall. This wasn't in a physical sense, but on a mystical level. It was her soul that was falling. Like a ship that had lost its power in a storm, she was lost. How did I get here? I can't remember. Was I killed by Arthas? Or was it the damn Sun King who did it? There was no concept of time here. Her life wasn't a series of events, but just a moment, a flash of thought in the infinite void. There was only darkness in front of her. Then she felt that she was falling. She really felt it, for the first time in a long time. She flinched. She was in extreme pain. She came here. She felt that her soul was being torn to pieces. She only felt pain. Did fighting against evil bravely and protecting her home mean endless pain? Cold. Despair. Fear. Strange things appeared in the endless darkness. Countless relatives and friends died, turning into mindless zombies that staggered around her. Seeing this scene, her heart became fragmented. The purplish-black scar of death passed through the city, splitting it in two. The citizens of Silvery Moon dragged their broken heads and innards behind them as they staggered towards the King of Death, an Astrian. In the end, they knelt on the ground and worshipped the despair that was about to rule them for all eternity. She was angry, but she couldn't resist because the horror that definitely didn't exist in the world of the living was suppressing her. Sharp claws of darkness surged out from all directions and tore at her. She wanted to scream, but she couldn't. A pair of evil eyes stared at her from behind, but she couldn't turn back. She saw the Sun King's rotten mouth, his face full of mockery for once playing with her in the palm of his hand. Her soul desperately tried to charge at him, but under the pressure of this horror, she somehow lost the courage to resist. She suddenly found that she had once again become that underage blonde child who was trembling in fear in the dark forest, bearing the consequences of making the wrong choice alone. As expected, my elder sister, my younger sister. Is your foresight the most correct? As expected, I shouldn't have been so rebellious. I should have listened to Xueqi earlier. In the outside world, every elf looked at the female ranger's twitching body in horror and listened to her continuous screams. That was Sylvana's soul being ravaged and tortured. Every elf felt great pity for her, but also fear for the Sun King. Death coil. With such a simple strike, Sylvanas, who they had placed their greatest hopes on, had been defeated. Their courage was waning, their willpower was beginning to wane, their knees were about to give way, and their bodies were about to kneel. At the very end, suddenly, the Sun King was shot by an arrow. He let out the most mournful scream since his appearance. It was an arrow shot by a young girl who had suddenly appeared at the bottom of the stairs. That girl had a face similar to Sylvanas. Enter Lilith Windrunner. This is impossible, the Sun King screamed. Of course my arrow can't, but what if it's Alexstrasza's arrow? The youngest of the Windrunner family smiled faintly. Chapter 793. Sun King's ashen face suddenly twisted. That was anger. That was fear. Sun King's murky eyes turned with difficulty. The vision from his soul finally trembled and focused on his shoulder. The youngest daughter of the Windrunner family was right. That ordinary-looking green arrow was indeed attached to a long red hair that was at least half a meter long. As long as one focused their mind on the hair, anyone with the slightest intuition would be able to clearly feel a mighty dragon's roar coming from it. It was indeed the power of a dragon that stood at the top of the food chain in the world. This terrifying power that seemed to be able to incinerate all unclean things in the world was definitely the power of Alexstrasza, the giver of life. The flame of purification that contained the power of life was definitely the greatest nemesis of undead creatures. In the original history, during the battle at the Heaven's Wrathgate, under the scheming of the dread Lord Varamesas, the great potioneer of the Undercity's Royal Potioneering Association, Potioneer Putris, rebelled and used the new plague. The army led by Duke Bolvar and young Salyafar was completely wiped out by the plague. Bolvar was dying, and Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza used the flame of life to burn the entire battlefield in order to prevent the new type of plague from spreading. This clearly explained why the seemingly more powerful lightning arrow was easily dispelled, and why Lilith's seemingly soft shot could easily penetrate Sun King's defense. Anastrian's body was trembling, and his soul was in fear. It wasn't that the seemingly weaker Lilith had the possibility of killing him, but that there was another possibility. Everyone knew that the Windrunner family was with Xueqi. Similarly, everyone knew that Xueqi had saved the Red Dragon Queen and had a life-and-death friendship with her. Otherwise, who would dare to pull out the Red Dragon Queen's hair? Would they be tired of living? Lilith's appearance here with the Red Dragon Queen's hair proved one thing. Xueqi had made a move. Once a smile appeared on Lilith's poker face, it turned out that she could also make a very intimidating expression. The whisper of the wind that floated into Sun King's ears confirmed his greatest fear. Duke Marcus asked me to send his regards to you. Xueqi made his move. Xueqi really made a move? The shock that rose from the deepest part of his soul made the Sun King unable to remain calm. The name of a man is like the shadow of a tree. Duque's crafty schemes and Duque's miracles had long been imprinted in the hearts of the older generation experts. Anyone who had experienced the previous battle at the Door of Darkness would never forget how Duque had calmly held the fort and annihilated the million-strong orc army. The High Elves would never forget how Duque retreated when the Long Song Forest was lost and the tribe's soldiers were at the city gates. That was Duque's highlight. It was also a moment of shame for the elves. The ordinary elves might see Duque as their savior. But the Sun King and the Silver Moon Council would never do that. To them, who prided themselves on their nobility, it was already a great sin for Duque to not sacrifice himself to help the elves keep the tribe out of the Long Song Forest with his army. Whether it was intentional or not, Duque deliberately allowed the tribe to burn and loot in the forest and then forced Quel Salis to join the alliance. This was an unforgivable sin. In the eyes of the Sun King, Duque was a guy who was written as an ally and read as a poisonous snake. Now, Duque had indeed come and once again gave him the most fatal blow at the most critical moment. The Sun King flew into a rage out of humiliation and roared, "Duque? No, this human brat has no right to touch my kingdom. He obstructs my rule over my subjects. Has talent. Duque." The elves in the square did not react at first, but they immediately saw Lilith, who had torn off her disguise and was facing them sideways. It was also a standard ranger outfit, but whether it was the shoulder armor or other equipment, it was clearly the Stormwind standard. And the emblem on her chest. That was clearly the emblem of the Marcus family. The elves were worried. Yes, the pride of the High Elves, the Windrunner family, had long been under the command of that living, walking hero. Prince Kale, that's had surrendered. Lor, Thats and Hageron had been defeated. The last elven hero, Servanas, had also been defeated. In the end, it was the Alliance who ended things. Even though the Alliance's help made them feel a faint warmth, they also felt a sense of sorrow. So the glory of the High Elves had long been gone? If Duque had come out at the beginning, the proud elves would definitely not have been able to accept this charity in their hearts. However, when the expectations in their hearts turned into disappointment, then into despair, and the bottom line in their hearts fell again and again, Duque's attack became as sweet and pleasant as Agar. The Sun King went berserk. No, even if Duque came, he would not be a match for me. The little girl from the Windrunner family, right? I'll turn you into undead first. I want to see what kind of expression Duque will have on his face when he comes. After saying that, he clenched his skinny hand, and Savannah's body, which had lost control, suddenly convulsed more sharply. The vision of fear targeted the second sister of the Windrunner family. She was surrounded by terror. They happily tortured and ravaged her consciousness, taking pleasure in her pain. It was a painful and hopeless situation. It seemed that she would stay here forever. The boundless void, the darkness, and the unknown realm full of pain. Just then, she suddenly saw light. It was not a holy gold, but a mysterious purple blue. It was the light of arcane magic. She did not know whether it took a moment for the light to break through the darkness, or a lifetime. The light seemed to have opened its arms and came to save her. In the darkness, an imposing male figure embraced Servanas with a halo of light. She found that she had lost all her equipment and was naked. She helplessly curled into a ball. The first sound she made after she regained her voice was a cry. Servanas' Windrunner failed. It was a failure as a high elf. However, the light did not seem to think so. You have done a good job. You and Lilith stalled the fallen Sun King and bought time for the elves to be reborn. It was a familiar voice. It was Duque's voice. Warmth enveloped her. It was a strange feeling that she had never known before. Savannah suddenly understood that it was Duque's soul that was warming her soul. Suddenly, she felt a wave of shyness, because everything about her had just been revealed to Dooku without reservation, her body, her soul. Strangely, she no longer had the rebellious thoughts. She was like a traveler in the desert who was about to die of thirst, trying to stretch her neck and ask for the quiet and warm refuge of Duque. Suddenly, she opened her eyes and saw a scene that made her feel like she was struck by lightning. When she lost consciousness, she seemed to have kissed her brother-in-law and brother-in-law. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.